Deputy Mark Danner never liked that stretch of highway between Junction and Menard. It wasn't the long hours or the endless desert that bothered him. It was the silence. That heavy, unnatural kind of quiet that seemed to swallow the sound of his own breathing. The road was 2 lanes wide, a cracked ribbon cutting through mesquite and dry grass with the occasional rusted mailbox or leaning fence post to remind you people still lived out there. Most didn't. Most had moved closer to town years ago when the wells dried and the dust came back. Still, when dispatch sent him out that Tuesday morning to check on an abandoned suitcase near mile marker 12, he didn't think much of it. People dumped junk all the time. Tires, mattresses, broken appliances. Sometimes even the contents of an old life someone didn't want anymore. The sun was barely up when he got there. The sky was that pale blue you see just before heat takes over the land, and the only sound was the ticking of his cruiser's engine as it cooled. The suitcase sat a few feet off the shoulder, half covered in dust and scrub. Leather, dark brown, old-fashioned, the kind with brass buckles and a thick handle. It looked out of place, like something out of another decade. He crouched down and brushed the dirt away. The initials burned into the handle read MJ. The locks were undone, though the lid stayed shut as if something inside pressed against it. Mark hesitated. Something about it felt off. And not just because it was strange luggage to find out here. The air had gone still, no wind moving, no birds calling. Even the cicadas had stopped. He reached for the latch and flipped it open. The lid creaked back and a faint smell of mildew and something else, something like paper long left in a wet basement, rose up. Inside were sheets of old drawing paper stacked neatly, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one held a child's drawing done in crayon. Houses, stick figures, suns with smiling faces. Typical kid stuff at first, but as he lifted more of them out, they began to change. The lines got shakier, the colors darker. Figures appeared in the backgrounds, tall shapes with long arms and no faces. The last few drawings showed nothing but a dark field under a crooked moon, and a small figure standing alone at the center, drawn in frantic black lines until the crayon tore the paper. Mark frowned and looked around, half expecting someone to be watching. The wind picked up just then, a soft gust that rustled the grass, and the strangest thing happened. As the air moved through the open suitcase, he heard a faint sound. It was soft, almost imperceptible at first, like the whimper of a small animal caught in a trap. Then it became rhythmic, breathing. A slow, deliberate inhale and exhale coming from the suitcase itself. He dropped the papers and stepped back, staring. The sound stopped as quickly as it started. He looked inside again, half expecting to find a speaker or some prank device. But there was only the paper and the faint odor of something damp. He slammed the case shut, carried it to the cruiser, and put it in the trunk. He told himself it was just air moving through the frame, a trick of acoustics. That's what he wrote in the initial report, too. But the truth was he didn't believe it. The sound had felt too real, too human. He drove it back to the sheriff's office in Menard and logged it into evidence. Sheriff Hayes took one look and chuckled. "Probably just some junk from an old house cleanout," he said. "Don't let that imagination of yours start running wild again." Mark didn't argue, but he noticed Hayes didn't open it either. They left it in the back room near the old file cabinets. That night, long after everyone went home, Mark stayed late doing paperwork. The wind outside was strong, rattling the metal roof. Around midnight, he started hearing a sound, faint at first, coming from the evidence room, breathing. He told himself it was the wind again, that it carried through the old vents, but after a few minutes he couldn't ignore it. He got up, unlocked the door to the evidence room, and stepped inside. The air was stale and heavy. His flashlight beam cut across boxes, shelves, and that same leather suitcase sitting in the corner where he'd left it. The breathing grew louder as he approached. It was slow, deep, and unmistakably human. He pointed the light directly at the suitcase. The sound stopped. Mark crouched beside it, heart hammering, and pressed his hand against the lid. The leather was cold, damp to the touch. Then something inside shifted. Just a small movement, but enough to make the suitcase rock slightly. He staggered back and drew his weapon, flashlight trembling in his hand. Nothing else moved. The building was silent again. He called out, voice cracking a little, asking if anyone was there. Nothing. He finally walked over, grabbed the suitcase by the handle, and dragged it into the parking lot. He left it there under the buzzing light and went home for the night without another word to anyone. When he came back the next morning, it was gone. Hayes swore he hadn't moved it. None of the deputies had either. The security cameras for the lot had gone out around 2 a.m., cutting to static for exactly 7 minutes. They joked that someone must have needed a new suitcase bad enough to steal it, but Mark didn't laugh. The image of those drawings still burned in his mind, especially the last one, the small figure standing alone under that moon. 3 weeks later, a rancher about 15 miles south called in a report. His dog had been barking all night, and that morning he found something by his gate. A leather suitcase. The same dark brown. The same brass buckles. Sheriff Hayes went out first, then called for Mark when he saw the initials. MJ. The case was open this time, papers scattered in the dirt. The drawings had changed again. They were darker, smeared with something reddish-brown. The little figure was gone from the field. In its place was a crude sketch of a man in uniform, lying face down beside a road. Mark didn't say anything. He helped gather the papers, packed them into an evidence bag, and loaded the suitcase into the cruiser himself. On the way back to town, the air inside the car grew thick and still. His ears popped like they do before a storm. And then he heard it again, that same slow breathing, faint but steady coming from the back seat. He pulled over hard, tires spitting gravel. The sound stopped the second he turned. The back seat was empty. The suitcase sat on the floorboard where he'd placed it. The lid was slightly open now, just enough to see the edges of those drawings shifting faintly as if stirred by unseen hands. He shut the door and left the car idling on the roadside while he stood outside, breathing in the hot, dusty air. The wind rose again, tugging at his hat, and through it, clear as anything, came a whisper that seemed to drift straight from the trunk. A child's voice, soft, barely above the wind. "Find me." When he looked back at the cruiser, every window was fogged from the inside. By nightfall, the car returned to the station. The suitcase wasn't in it. No one ever found it again. Mark Danner turned in his badge a week later. He moved north, took work on a private ranch, and refused to speak about his time in Menard County. Years later, a road crew clearing brush near mile marker 12 came across something half buried in the sand. A leather suitcase. Old, cracked initials MJ burned into the handle. When the foreman kicked it open, the wind howled across the plains, and every man on that crew swore they heard it, soft and steady, like someone breathing just beneath the earth. Deputy Randall McKay had driven that stretch of County Road 87 100 times before, a lonely 2-lane snake of asphalt cutting through mesquite and sunburned fields east of Paris. Texas. That night, though, it felt different. The call had come in just after midnight. Missing person, female, 22, last seen near a property outside of town. Some old cattle barn off the road that hadn't been in use for decades. Her car was found in a ditch 2 miles away. Engine still warm. Driver's door open, keys dangling. It was one of those calls that made your gut tighten before you even hit the siren. By the time McKay pulled up to the property, the wind had picked up, stirring dry leaves across the dirt. The moon was thin, pale enough that his flashlight beam cut through the dark like a blade. The barn stood about 50 yards from the old farmhouse, its wooden boards gray and warped, roof sagging in the middle. He called out, his voice vanishing into the night. No answer. Only the sound of insects and the creak of the barn's tin siding. He parked, radioed in his location, and stepped out. The smell hit him before he reached the door. Rot and old hay, the scent of long-dead animals, something sour underneath. The main door was hanging off its hinges, but the smaller door to the right, the one with a heavy padlock, looked almost new. That's what made him stop. Everything else on that property was falling apart, but that door had been locked recently. Too recently. He moved closer, beam tracing over the wood, scratches around the latch, mud on the bottom panel, as if someone had kicked it again and again. He banged on it, nothing. Then a faint sound, almost too quiet to notice, something mechanical, muffled. He leaned in, listening. That's when he heard it, a scream. Not loud, not clear, but real. A woman's voice, strained and desperate. He jerked back, heart slamming, then radioed in, voice sharp. Possible suspect inside, requesting backup. Old Miller property, County Road 87. The dispatcher's reply cracked through static, but he didn't wait. He couldn't. He heard it again, that scream, louder this time, pleading. He grabbed the crowbar from his trunk and went back to the door. The first hit sent splinters flying. The second broke the lock clean off. The door swung open and he raised his light, ready, weapon drawn. The beam cut through dust and cobwebs, lighting up the empty interior. Empty except for one thing. A folding chair in the center of the dirt floor. On the chair, an old tape recorder, its spools turning. A low hiss came from the speaker, then a faint sound. The same scream he'd heard before. McKay stood there frozen, listening as the tape played. The woman's voice begged for help, sobbing, saying she couldn't see, saying, "He's coming." Then silence. The tape kept spinning. He swallowed hard and shut it off. His own breathing echoed in the dark. The barn smelled worse now, like the earth itself was sick. He scanned the floor. Footprints, small, leading toward a trapdoor near the back. He knelt, wiped dirt away. It had been nailed shut. He pried it open, light sweeping down into a narrow space. Nothing but blackness and the faintest whiff of decay. He called down, his voice cracking. No response. The air below felt colder than it should have been. He dropped a glow stick and saw it roll onto dirt about 6 feet down. It lit up a tunnel, narrow, dug by hand. He radioed again for backup, voice low, but the signal was gone. Static, no connection. He cursed and went down himself, one boot after another. The tunnel was damp and smelled of mold and something worse. His light shook as he moved forward. The walls were packed clay, scrawled with something dark. Words, dozens of them. "Stay quiet. He hears. Don't open the door." His pulse hammered. The tunnel turned left, then right, ending in a small chamber. There was a mattress, filthy, covered in old stains. Chains bolted to the wall, a length of rope, and on the far side a small wooden box. He crouched, reached out, and opened it. Inside were cassette tapes, maybe 20, each labeled by date. The most recent one was yesterday. He took it, popped it into the recorder he'd brought, and pressed play. Static at first, then a man's voice, deep, calm, almost kind. "You shouldn't have come here." McKay froze. "You heard her because I wanted you to. You came in because I needed you to. There always has to be one more." The sound of breathing on the tape, then a metallic scrape like a blade against stone. McKay turned, light flicking over the tunnel behind him. The dirt was shifting, moving. Someone or something was crawling toward him. He drew his gun, backing away. But the tunnel walls seemed to close in, pressing against him. He fired once, the flash lighting up a shape, pale and wrong, dragging itself on all fours, face twisted into something that might have once been human. It didn't stop. He fired again until the gun clicked empty. When the other deputies arrived 20 minutes later, they found his cruiser idling by the fence, door open, radio hissing. The barn door stood wide. Inside there was no sign of McKay, only his flashlight lying on the dirt floor beside the chair. The recorder was still running, but the tape had changed. It wasn't the woman anymore. It was him, his voice distorted but unmistakable. "Don't come in here. Don't open the door, please, he's still..." Then silence. The sheriff ordered the property sealed, but locals say the door gets locked again every night, no matter who breaks it. Some kids went out there last Halloween, tried to spend the night. One of them came back talking about a voice that kept whispering through the wood, saying it needed to be let out. Nobody's seen the others, and sometimes when the wind shifts across the fields, you can still hear that recorder turning, playing the same tape over and over, a warning that nobody ever listens to. It started with a call from the sheriff's office on a dry March morning. The man on the other end of the line was slow-spoken, his voice dragging like the wind through mesquite branches. He told me there'd been reports from travelers passing down County Road 7, a strip of asphalt that ran 20 miles out from Waco, ending in a patch of fields where the grass grew tall enough to whisper. The reports were strange, he said, but in Texas you get strange things sometimes. Still, he figured I ought to take a look. When I got there, the air smelled of rust and rain that hadn't fallen yet. The road stretched out flat, both directions vanishing into heat shimmer. The fence ran alongside it, barbed wire strung across sun-bleached cedar posts. And on those posts, nailed in a long, unbroken line, were dolls, hundreds of them. Porcelain dolls, each one different, each one ruined in its own way. Some had hair that looked like it had been dipped in oil, some had faces cracked like old china, and others were missing eyes or hands or whole pieces of their heads. They faced the road, every single one, turned just slightly toward the direction of oncoming cars, like they'd been caught mid-turn, like they wanted to see who was coming. I counted about 50 before I stopped trying. They went on for almost half a mile, spaced just a few feet apart, all nailed through the chest or throat, their limbs dangling limp, catching the breeze. When the wind blew, they clicked faintly against the wire, a hollow tapping that carried far. I stood there a long while, feeling watched. The sheriff showed up a few minutes later, a heavy man in a tan uniform with a face that had seen too many miles. He told me an old rancher named Thomas Cray owned the property, though he hadn't lived there in almost 20 years. The place had fallen apart after his wife died. The sheriff said some hunters had been out that way a few years back and claimed they saw lights on the property, but nobody ever followed up. We drove down the dirt track toward the ranch house. The dolls continued part of the way, then stopped abruptly. There was a gate, its hinges eaten through with rust. A sign hung there, faint paint spelling out something I couldn't read anymore. The house beyond it was sagging inward, the roof caved, the front porch broken like rotted teeth. The air around the place felt still, as if the world had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. Inside, the house was empty except for old furniture and dust so thick it muffled sound. There were dolls in there too, but not nailed up. They sat on shelves and chairs along the windowsills. One rested on the stove, its glass eyes turned toward the doorway. Another lay on the floor with a broken neck. The sheriff kicked it aside, muttering something about kids and drugs. But it wasn't kids. I could feel that much. In the back room we found photographs. They were framed in tarnished silver, showing a woman with wide light eyes and a small, careful smile. She held a doll in each picture, sometimes one, sometimes several. In one photo she stood by the same fence where we'd seen the line, and though it was hard to tell from the faded print, it looked like she was nailing the first doll in place. There was a note pinned beneath one of the frames. The handwriting was jagged, uneven. She said they talk at night. The sheriff looked at me, but neither of us said anything. That evening, after I went home, I couldn't stop thinking about those dolls. I dreamed about them. Rows and rows of pale faces under moonlight, eyes glinting like wet stones. When I woke up, I still heard that clicking sound, the porcelain tapping against wire. I drove back out the next day. Couldn't help it. Something about that place pulled. The air was hotter now, shimmering with dust. I parked the truck by the fence and got out. The dolls looked the same, but as I walked along the line, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. One of the dolls, a little one with a blue dress, had turned its head. Just slightly, maybe an inch, but it was turned toward the road in a different way, like it was looking straight at me. I stared at it, waiting for the wind, but there was none. I took a step closer. The head turned again, a faint creak of porcelain and string. Its glass eyes caught the light, and I saw movement reflected there, something shifting behind me. I turned quick, but the road was empty, the grass still. When I looked back, the doll's head was back in place, facing forward. I told myself it was heat or nerves or both. I told myself a lot of things. But when I turned to leave, I heard it again. The sound of porcelain tapping, but slower now, rhythmic, deliberate, like something crawling along the fence. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that line stretching down the road. I imagined them standing there in the dark, turning their heads to follow each car that passed, their little mouths whispering through cracked lips. I tried to tell myself it was some art project, some lonely man's ritual, but deep down I knew better. 2 days later, the sheriff called again. He sounded different this time, quieter. Said someone had vandalized the fence, torn a few of the dolls down. When he went to check it out, he found blood on the posts. Not a lot, but enough to notice. I went with him. The dolls were still there, all except maybe 10 or 12 that had been pulled off. The nails were bent and blackened, and on one post we found a small patch of dried blood and a tuft of hair. Not animal hair, too fine, too clean. The sheriff said coyotes, but his voice didn't sound sure. We kept walking, following the fence line all the way to where it met the ranch gate. That's when I noticed the smell. Sweet and rotten, faint at first, then stronger. We followed it into the weeds, and there we found what was left of a man. Or what had been one. His body was slumped against the post, his shirt torn open, his face gone pale with rot, and in his chest, driven deep through his sternum, was a long, rusted nail. His arms hung limp, and his head was tilted toward the road. Someone had nailed a doll to his shoulder, its tiny porcelain hand touching his cheek. The sheriff threw up. I stood there, unable to move. The doll's face was perfect, unbroken, and its eyes were wet. I don't mean shiny, wet. The sheriff called it in. They took the body away, taped off the area, said it was probably a transient who tried to steal something, fell on a nail, maybe an accident, but that didn't explain the other thing. When the forensics team pulled the nail from the man's chest, they found another beneath it, smaller, and another beneath that. and under that, a fragment of porcelain. Like the nail had been driven through a doll, through another, and then through him. That night the wind picked up. Folks in town said they heard something out by County Road 7, like a child crying, soft and thin, carrying across the fields. Others said they saw lights along the fence, flickering like candles. I drove out again before dawn. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see for myself. The air was cool, still the kind of morning that feels hollow. When I reached the fence, I saw movement. The dolls were swaying, though there was no wind. Their eyes caught my headlights and glinted back in hundreds of tiny reflections. And then as I sat there watching, one of them lifted its arm. Just a twitch like a spasm, but I saw it. Another followed, and another, until the whole line of them seemed to shift in unison, their little hands trembling against the wire. Then they stopped perfectly still. I turned the truck around and drove back into town without looking back. The sheriff retired not long after. They tore down the fence, burned every doll they could find. The property went up for sale twice, but nobody stayed. Folks say the grass won't grow there now, that even cattle won't graze near it. Sometimes I drive that way at night when I can't sleep. The posts are gone, but when the moon's right, you can still see their shapes in the dark. A line of pale figures, faces turned toward the road, eyes glinting faintly as you pass. And if you slow down, if you listen close, you can hear them tapping. At first light, the eastbound lanes of Highway 59 shimmered in the haze of a Texas dawn, that kind of half-light that makes everything seem both real and imagined. The sun hadn't yet cleared the line of pecan trees along the shoulder, and the air was thick with the smell of dew and old asphalt. A recliner sat perfectly centered in the middle of the road, facing east. It wasn't new, wasn't old either. Brown leather, cracked at the arms. One of those bulky, lazy boy types that looked like it had seen years of living room football games and TV dinners. But it shouldn't have been there, not on the highway. And yet every morning it was. At first, people thought it was a prank. Some kids from Nacogdoches High with too much time on their hands. Maybe a bored trucker having a laugh. The county road crew hauled it away the first day, tossed it into a landfill. The next morning it was back. Same spot, same angle, perfectly centered between the yellow lines. They thought maybe someone was dragging it out there in the night, but there were no tire marks, no footprints in the gravel, not even a scuff where it sat. Just that chair, clean as a showroom floor, waiting for the sun to rise. When Sheriff Mallory got called out the third morning, he didn't take it seriously. He'd seen worse things on that stretch of road. Wrecks that left families twisted into the guardrail, drunks passed out on the shoulder, even the occasional body dumped from Houston. But the chair unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. He had the crew haul it off again, told them to lock it in the county garage. They did. The next day, the recliner was back in the road, facing east, and the garage was empty. After that, folks started stopping to look. You'd drive by at dawn and see trucks pulled over, people standing in the pale light staring at it like they expected something to happen. Rumors spread, as they always do. Some said it was cursed. Some said it was a memorial for the dead. Others said if you sat in it, you'd see something. Your future, your sins, the people you'd lost. Nobody ever admitted to sitting in it, not at first. Then came the story about the hitchhiker. A man in his 30s walking south along the shoulder, sunburned and carrying a small duffel bag. A farmer named Lyle Porter picked him up near the county line just before sunrise. The hitchhiker didn't talk much, just stared out the window, quiet as a ghost. When they passed mile marker 217, Lyle saw the chair. The man looked straight at it, then turned pale like he'd seen a face he recognized. "You might want to keep driving," he said softly. Lyle asked why, but the man didn't answer. They drove another half-mile before Lyle turned to look at him again, and the passenger seat was empty. The duffel bag was gone too. The door hadn't opened, and there were no cars behind them. Just an empty seat and the highway fading in the mirror. Word got around after that. Truckers stopped driving that stretch at dawn. Some swore the chair moved slightly each morning, inching closer to the town. Others said they saw someone sitting in it. A silhouette of a man, maybe a woman, too still to be alive. The county installed cameras, but every recording between 3 a.m. and sunrise turned to static. The feed would flicker, distort, and when it cleared, the chair would just be there again, centered and waiting. The first person who tried to burn it was a kid named Evan. He and his friends soaked it with gasoline one night and lit it up. They said it burned hot, too hot for the small amount of fuel, the flames a strange green-white that made their eyes water. When it was over, the chair was still there, untouched. The next day, Evan didn't come to school. His mother found his bed empty, his window open, and the smell of burned leather hanging in the room. They never found him, but that morning the chair had something new, an old scorched handprint on the armrest. After that, people stopped talking about it. It became a ghost story, something whispered to outsiders. The sheriff retired early, moved away. His replacement, a younger man named Griggs, decided to have the highway rerouted. He claimed it was for safety, but everyone knew why. The state poured new asphalt around the curve, bypassing that section entirely. But the first morning after the detour opened, a driver spotted it again, on the new stretch of road, perfectly centered, facing east. Nobody touched it after that. It became part of the landscape like the trees or the utility poles. Every dawn, there it was. Sometimes in the half-light you could swear it looked occupied. People started saying that if you looked too long, you'd start to see someone you knew sitting there, a brother, a wife, someone gone too soon. But if you blinked, they were gone. Some even claimed it moved at night, following the direction of traffic mile by mile. Then last spring, a local reporter from Lufkin named Dana Hollis decided to make it her story. She was skeptical, thought it was small-town superstition. She spent 3 nights camped out near mile marker 217, recording everything. Her notes, recovered later from her car, described strange noises between 2 and 4 a.m., low humming, like wires vibrating, and what she called voices under the road. On the 3rd night, she wrote that the chair wasn't empty anymore. She said she saw someone sitting in it facing her, though she couldn't make out their face. The last entry said only, "It looked like me." Her car was found parked on the shoulder at dawn, engine running, camera still recording. The footage was nothing but static and faint breathing. They found her phone beside the chair, face down on the asphalt. Dana was never seen again. A week later, the chair was gone. The highway was empty for the first time in years. People thought maybe it was over. But at sunrise the following Monday it was back, this time a little closer to town, just outside the old diner. A waitress arriving for the morning shift saw it and screamed. She said there was someone sitting in it again, wearing Dana's yellow jacket, staring east into the rising sun. By the time anyone else came outside, the chair was empty. The jacket was gone. But there was something new carved into the seat cushion, deep and deliberate. Next, the highway still runs quiet at dawn. Most drivers speed through that stretch without looking, pretending they don't see the shape in their headlights. But if you ever drive that way at first light, between the hush of the trees and the hum of the tires, look straight ahead. You might see it perfectly centered facing east waiting. And if you're unlucky, if you slow down and look too long, you might notice something strange about the chair. It might look newer than before, cleaner somehow, as if someone's been taking care of it. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll see a reflection in the leather, faint and quick, like someone standing right behind you, whispering for you to stop. And if you ever do stop and you feel the pull to sit, don't. Because whatever sits in that chair at dawn isn't meant to face the sunrise. It's meant to face you. Under a sky swollen with heat and static, the stretch of Highway 281 south of Mineral Wells ran through fields of dust and scrub oak, a place truckers knew as the kind of road where the air itself felt haunted. The asphalt shimmered like oil under the sun by day, but it was at night that it changed, when the dark rolled in from the plains and swallowed everything beyond the glow of a rig's headlights. Out here, the CB radios came alive with more than chatter. Some said they caught whispers, fragments of voices calling out from nowhere, and among them all was the one they called the Crossroads Caller. It started with small talk, according to the stories. A woman's voice, soft but cracking, bleeding through the static like someone speaking from inside a storm. She'd beg for help over and over. She always said the same thing. Her car had broken down, her baby was in the back seat, and she was stuck just past mile marker 191. Every time. The same marker. But the maps only went up to 190. The first time I heard about her was from an old driver named Curtis down at the Texaco Diner in Jacksboro. He was one of those men who'd spent 40 years on the road and wore the miles in his face. He told me he'd heard her one night in August driving his tanker up from San Antonio around 2 a.m. The radio crackled, dead quiet for hours. Then the voice came through. She sounded real, he said, his hands shaking just slightly as he stirred his coffee. You know how static plays tricks on you sometimes, makes a voice sound distant? This wasn't that. It was like she was sitting in the passenger seat whispering in my ear. She kept saying, "Please, somebody help me, I can't wake my baby." Curtis tried to answer her. Said he flipped through every channel, tried to get a location, tried to raise anyone else nearby. The moment he said he'd come find her, the radio squealed, went silent, and his headlights dimmed. Just a flicker, but enough to make him ease off the gas. When he passed mile marker 190, he slowed, scanning for a shoulder or a car pulled off. Nothing. Then, a mile later, where the road should have opened onto open pasture, he saw something. It was like a turnoff that shouldn't be there, he told me. Just gravel and a ditch. Looked like it went back toward the trees, but there weren't supposed to be any roads out there. I pulled up next to it, looked down, and saw tire tracks going in but not coming out. He'd gone about 100 yards before his CB came back to life. Only this time the voice wasn't begging. It was laughing. Soft, wet laughter. The kind that makes your stomach twist because it doesn't sound quite human anymore. He floored it after that, didn't look back. By morning, when he went through again with daylight, there was no turnoff. Just smooth grass and fence line. Curtis wasn't the only one. Over the next few years, I heard a dozen variations of the same story from drivers running the Texas backroads. Men and women with thousands of miles under their belts. Folks who didn't scare easy. Always the same details. A woman on the radio, a mile marker that didn't exist, a phantom turnoff. But the endings were never the same. Some just heard her and drove on. Others swore they stopped, found tire marks, sometimes even saw a car. A blue sedan, hazard lights flashing. Empty inside except for a baby blanket folded in the front seat. A few said when they leaned close to look inside, the lights cut off and the air went cold like a freezer door had swung open. Then they'd see her reflected in the glass standing behind them. I never believed those parts. I thought it was CB folklore, a modern ghost story for lonely roads, until one night last November, when I took a load of pipe down to Austin and decided to run 281 for old time's sake. It was past midnight when I hit the stretch between Mineral Wells and Stephenville, moon high and the radio hissing low. That's when it came through. A woman's voice, faint but clear. "Please, help me. My car broke down. My baby won't wake up." My hand froze over the mic. I hadn't thought about Curtis in years, but I felt the hair rise on my arms. I looked at the GPS, mile 189. I knew what was coming next. "Please, if anyone can hear me," she said again. "I'm at mile 191. I tried to answer, my voice rough in my throat. "Ma'am, where exactly are you?" "Mile 191. "You sure?" Static, then a low, hollow cry. "He won't wake up." I slowed down. The road was empty. Not another truck for miles. My headlights picked up the next marker, 190. That's when the radio cut out. Everything went dark. No headlights, no dash lights, no hum of the engine. Just silence. The truck coasted in neutral, heavy on the downhill, while the world outside the cab seemed to fold in on itself. The air got thick, almost buzzing. Then the headlights flicked back on, and there it was. A turnoff. Just like Curtis said, gravel narrow leading into the trees. Against every bit of sense in me, I pulled over. The gravel crunched under the tires, and I rolled about 30 yards in before stopping. The smell hit me first. Damp earth, rot like pond water and gasoline. My high beams caught the shape of a car up ahead. A blue sedan, driver's door open, lights dead. I climbed out, flashlight in hand, my boots sinking into mud. The closer I got, the quieter everything seemed to get. No crickets, no wind, just the faint hiss of my radio from the cab, whispering like it was trying to tune itself. The car was older, maybe a late 80s model. Texas plates coated in grime. Inside, the baby blanket was there, pale yellow, clean as if someone had just folded it. The passenger window was fogged over from the inside. When I wiped it with my sleeve, I saw the handprint, small like a child's pressed from within. That's when my radio shrieked. I ran back to the truck, nearly slipping in the mud, jumped in and threw it into reverse. As I backed up onto the highway, I looked in the mirror and saw headlights behind me. Not moving, just glowing faintly in the dark where the turnoff was. I pressed the pedal harder. Didn't stop until I hit Stephenville city limits. The next morning I drove back in daylight. Mile marker 191 wasn't there. No turnoff, no tracks, nothing but dry grass and barbed wire. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it until I cleaned my boots and saw the mud. Dark red, like it had soaked up more than water. A week later I went by that diner in Jacksboro. Asked if Curtis still came around. The waitress looked at me funny, said he'd passed years ago. Died on the road south of Lampasas, heart attack behind the wheel. His rig had veered off onto a gravel turnoff that didn't exist on any map. Sometimes when I'm driving late and the radio starts hissing, I hear her voice again, faint, almost pleading. Please, somebody help me. I don't answer anymore, because I think whoever does takes his place. In the flatlands outside Sweetwater, where the wind rolls like an endless sigh through brittle mesquite and dust, there's a field no one fences. Locals call it Harper's Field, though no one remembers who Harper was. What people do remember is the bus. A yellow school bus half buried in mud near the tree line, its paint peeled to a pale scab of color, windows filmed over like cataracts. Nobody knows how long it's been there. Long enough that the earth started to swallow it. Long enough that kids tell stories about it. They say if you knock 3 times on its side, someone inside knocks back. Not once, not twice, 3 times, slow and deliberate. The bus faces the road, leaning at a slant like it's trying to claw its way back to pavement. The front half is sunk so deep that the bumper's half eaten by mud. The tires are long gone. A brittle chain-link fence used to mark the property line nearby, but it's rusted through, swallowed by weeds. Every Halloween, the Sweetwater high schoolers dare each other to go there. Most don't. The ones who do never stay long. In 2011, a kid named Derek Hunt disappeared out there. He was 17, a baseball player, clean record, no reason to run. They found his phone by the fence the next day, face down in the dirt, screen cracked. His last photo was a blurry shot of the bus, something dark inside one of the windows. The sheriff's report said it was just shadows. Everyone wanted to believe that. 11 years later, a man named Raymond Torres bought the land for cheap. He was a mechanic from Abilene, recently divorced, trying to start fresh. The field came with the bus, though he thought nothing of it at first. His plan was to clear it, maybe plant pecan trees. But the bus was too heavy to tow, even with a winch. He said the mud under it was like quicksand, so he left it. Raymond lived in a trailer near the road, about 200 yards from the bus. At night, he said he could see its outline from his kitchen window, the windshield reflecting moonlight like eyes. One evening, after weeks of hearing nothing but coyotes and wind, he swore he heard knocking. 3 times, slow and hollow, echoing across the field. He tried to laugh it off, said it must have been the wind or maybe a branch hitting metal. But when he looked out the window, nothing moved. The next morning, he drove into town and told the clerk at the gas station. She looked up from the register and said, "You didn't go near it, did you?" He hadn't, not yet. "Don't," she told him. "Not at night." When he asked why, she just said, "Some doors don't stay shut if you knock." For a few weeks, he ignored it. He heard the knocks again once, faint but clear, 3 in a row. Always 3. The sound came even when there was no wind. Once he went outside with a flashlight. The field was empty, but the sound seemed to come from the ground itself. In April, Raymond's cousin Miguel came to help with clearing the land. They decided to open the bus just to see what was inside. The door was stuck, rusted shut. They pried it open with a crowbar. The air inside was damp and sour like rainwater and mold. Seats were ripped, stuffing spilling out. There were old school books scattered across the aisle, names written inside in fading pencil. Sweetwater Elementary, most said. A few had dates, 1982, 1983. They spent maybe 10 minutes inside. The floor was soft, spongy. The ceiling had water damage. But something else was wrong. Miguel pointed at the windows. "You see that?" he said. The windows fogged up while they were standing there, as if someone outside was breathing on them. They left right then, left the crowbar behind. That night, Raymond dreamed about kids' voices whispering. Not words, just the sound of children talking behind him. He woke up drenched in sweat. Outside, something gleamed in the dark. He thought it was the crowbar, half sunk in the mud. But when he stepped onto the porch, he saw footprints in the dirt. Small ones, like from children's shoes, leading from the bus toward his trailer. He followed them with the flashlight until they just stopped halfway across the field, like whoever made them vanished. He didn't sleep again that night. 2 days later, Miguel came back with a truck and said they should fill the bus with concrete or set it on fire. But the ground was too wet from rain. They decided to wait until it dried. That night, Raymond heard something again. This time it was laughter, distant, high-pitched. He thought it was coyotes at first until one of them called his name. The next morning, his neighbor found the trailer door open and the light still on. Raymond was gone. His truck was parked out front, keys still in the ignition. The ground outside was torn up with footprints, hundreds of them, small, bare, all around the trailer and leading back toward the bus. When deputies searched the bus again, they found something new. A handprint on one of the windows pressed from the inside. It was smeared with mud too small to belong to Raymond. The sheriff sealed the bus off with yellow tape, though no one believed it would stop anything. Within a week, the tape was torn down. People said they saw shapes moving inside, reflections that didn't match the angle of the light. Someone said they saw a kid's face in the driver's mirror. Last year, a YouTuber named Blake Darden came to film it. He specialized in ghost hunting, the kind where you whisper into a recorder and wait for static. He parked his van near the fence and started recording around sunset. His video is still online, though it cuts off halfway through. The first 15 minutes are what you'd expect. Commentary, drone shots, the bus from a distance. Then he walks closer, mic crackling in the wind. He jokes about knocking on the side, and he does. 3 times. There's silence for about 10 seconds. Then faint but unmistakable, 3 knocks answer from inside. He laughs nervously, says, "All right, who's screwing with me?" But the camera pans to the doorway and no one's there. Just shadows. Then, in the reflection of one of the windows, you can see something move. A small shape, maybe 3 feet tall, walking down the aisle. He swears softly. The camera shakes and then the feed cuts to static. They found his van still running the next morning, headlights on. His camera was in the grass. The sheriff's department took it as evidence, but the raw footage leaked online. In the last frame before it cuts out, you can hear a voice, a child's voice saying, "It's your turn to drive." Now no one goes near the bus after dark. Hunters say they hear knocking if they park nearby. The sound always comes from behind them, never from the direction they're looking. One man claimed he saw headlights flicker inside the bus like an engine trying to start. When he got closer, the lights went out. In town, people still talk about it, always with lowered voices. They say the bus was carrying kids from Sweetwater Elementary on a stormy day in 1983. When it skidded off the road, the driver lost control and the bus rolled into the field, landing nose first in the mud. The radio failed. The doors jammed. The storm flooded the field faster than anyone could reach them. All 17 children and the driver drowned before dawn. The next morning, rescuers found the bus half buried, the windows fogged from inside. They pulled out the bodies, all except one, a boy named Caleb Porter. His seat was empty. His name was written on one of the old notebooks they found years later. Some say he never left. Others say he was the one knocking first, calling for help that never came. Now when the wind dies over Sweetwater and the night hangs too still, you can hear the sound from the field. 3 knocks. Always 3. And if you're unlucky enough to answer, you might hear a small voice whisper back from the dark asking if you can take them home. There's a stretch of highway west of Mineral Wells that locals call the Devil's Mile. It runs through Palo Pinto County, a lonely 2-lane strip flanked by dry mesquite, rusted fences, and the hollow shells of old gas stations left to rot. Most folks take I-20 instead, faster and better lit, but some still drive the old road for nostalgia or because they like the quiet. That quiet's what pulls people in. The stillness, the Texas dusk rolling in over the brush, the low hum of cicadas. You can almost forget the world out there. But if you've lived in that part of Texas long enough, you know better. You don't drive the Devil's Mile after dark. Not since people started talking about the dog. Every witness describes the same thing. A massive black dog, thick like a mastiff with fur so dark it eats the light. It doesn't bark, doesn't snarl, doesn't chase. It just appears in the rearview mirror, padding along behind your car at an easy, unnatural pace, keeping perfect time with your speed. You'll see its eyes glowing pale yellow in the glass locked on yours. But when you turn your head to look, there's nothing on the road. Just the night and the flickering tail light stretching off into nothing. The first report I ever heard came from a trucker named Earl Simmons. He used to haul cattle through that stretch before the interstate cut through. One night, around 1978, he was coming down 281 toward Palo Pinto with an empty trailer. He said it was past midnight, sky thick with clouds, no moon. His CB had gone dead 20 minutes back, and the only light came from his high beams cutting the road ahead. Then he caught movement in his side mirror, a shape low to the ground running fast. He thought maybe a stray or a coyote until it drew closer. That's when he saw the eyes. Yellow, steady, never blinking. The thing ran just off his bumper, its mouth closed, muscles rolling under its fur like smoke. Earl said his first instinct was to speed up, but no matter how fast he went, that dog kept pace. He floored it past 80, felt the trailer fishtail on a curve, but in the mirror it was still there, loping smooth and silent. Then as quick as it appeared, it was gone. He stopped at a diner outside Mineral Wells, hands shaking so bad he spilled his coffee. When he looked again at the truck, he found a single paw print on the back door of the trailer, bigger than his hand. People said he made it up. But a few months later, 2 teens wrecked along that same road. Locals said they'd been drinking, but the boy who survived told the sheriff a different story. Said something ran behind them, a black shape he thought was a dog. His girlfriend screamed when she saw it in the mirror. The car swerved off the shoulder and hit a pecan tree. She died on impact. When they pulled the car out the next day, there were deep claw marks gouged into the trunk lid, like something had tried to climb onto it. Stories kept coming, decade after decade. Hunters, travelers, even a sheriff's deputy once. Always the same. The black dog that only exists in mirrors. Some say it's an omen. If you see it once, you're safe. Twice, you'll lose someone close. 3 times, and it comes for you. I didn't believe any of it until last summer. I was doing a photo project on abandoned places in Texas. I'd been shooting old churches, ghost towns, empty houses, the kind that smell like dust and old rain. A friend told me about a burned-out gas station near Palo Pinto, said it was perfect for the series. I drove out there around sundown, the kind of light that turns everything gold and soft. The road was empty except for a single buzzard picking at something dead in the ditch. I parked beside the old pumps, took a few shots, then waited for the dark. The place was perfect. Windows blown out, weeds growing through the concrete. A cracked sign half-hanging that read, "Fuel and Service." By the time I packed up, it was full dark. I got back on the road. No signal on my phone, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. A mile or 2 down, I caught movement in the rearview mirror. Something behind me keeping perfect pace with the car. I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe my own shadow, but then the shape resolved. Broad shoulders, sleek head, fur so black it almost shimmered. My stomach dropped. I stared in the mirror and those eyes met mine. Yellow, steady, bright like sulfur. I turned my head fast, nothing there. Just the road stretching empty. When I looked back in the mirror, it was closer. I felt the wheel drift and jerked it straight. I tried not to look again, but it's like the thing wanted me to. I could feel it, that weight in the glass pacing me, watching. I pressed the gas, hit 70, 75. The shape didn't fade. The faster I went, the clearer it became. I started whispering to myself without meaning to, like a prayer, or maybe just my brain trying to fill the silence. Finally, I took the next turnoff, a narrow gravel road that cut toward the lake. When I stopped, the mirror was empty. My chest felt like it had been crushed. I sat there for a long minute, then laughed it off. Told myself it was exhaustion, shadows, headlights bouncing off brush. That night I stayed at a cheap motel outside Mineral Wells. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow eyes in the mirror. Around 3, I got up, turned on the light, and went to splash water on my face. That's when I saw the mirror above the sink. Behind me, just for a second, there it was. Not on the road this time. In the room. Its reflection filled the glass. Shoulders brushing both sides of the frame, eyes fixed right on me. I spun around so fast I fell against the counter. Nothing there, just the hum of the AC unit. When I looked back at the mirror, the glass was fogged from my breath, but in the condensation, I swear there were marks. 4 long streaks running down like claws. I checked out before dawn, drove straight home to Fort Worth, never looked back. I thought that was the end of it. But 3 days later, I was editing my photos. In one shot, the one of the burned gas station, there was something behind me. A dark shape by the doorway, too tall for a man. Head lowered, eyes faintly glowing even in daylight. I deleted it. Tried to forget. But the nightmares started after that. I'd wake up to scratching sounds behind the walls, the soft pad of paws across the floorboards. I covered every mirror in the house with towels, but sometimes I'd catch a glimpse in the TV screen or the reflection of the window at night. Always the same eyes, watching. 2 weeks later, my sister called. Our father had been found dead in his truck on a ranch road outside Palo Pinto. The engine was running, doors locked from the inside. No sign of struggle, but the sheriff said there were paw prints in the dust on the hood. I didn't go to the funeral, couldn't bring myself to drive that far west, but lately every time I check my rearview mirror, I think I see something move behind me. Not much, just a flicker of shadow keeping pace. I tell myself it's nothing, a trick of the light. But sometimes when I look away too fast, I swear I catch the faint reflection of yellow eyes still burning in the glass. It was a lonely stretch of road between Amarillo and Childress, Texas, a forgotten two-lane that had seen better days. The asphalt was cracked, faded lines barely visible under the dirt and oil stains. To the west, the sun had slipped low behind the horizon, turning the scrubland into a reddish haze. The traveler, whose name was Tom Reiner, had been driving for hours. He was heading to Dallas after visiting his sister in New Mexico, and somewhere past Clarendon his gas gauge had started flirting with empty. That was when he saw it, the glow of a neon sign flickering through the dusk. Bud's Gas and Go, it read, the letters missing in places, buzzing faintly. He pulled in with relief. It wasn't much to look at. 2 old pumps standing crookedly on a concrete island, a small office with dusty windows, and a single overhead light that hummed with bugs circling around it. The place smelled of motor oil, rain-wet dirt, and something faintly metallic like rust. He stepped out, stretched his back, and looked around. There wasn't another soul or car in sight, just that pale building sitting in the dark like it had been waiting for him. Inside the office, the door creaked when he pushed it open. The counter was cluttered with receipts, oil cans, and a jar of candy that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Behind it stood a man, gray hair slicked back, eyes the pale blue of glass marbles. He was wearing a faded blue shirt with a stitched name tag that read Bud. "Evenin'," the man said, his voice slow and dry. "You need gas?" "Yeah," Tom said, glancing back at his car. "Just about ran out." Bud nodded, pulled a cigarette from a tin on the counter, and lit it without asking if it was allowed. "Pump's old," he said, exhaling smoke that smelled sharp, chemical. "Gotta reset it from here. How much you want?" "Fill it up," Tom said. He walked back out, shivering a little. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the sound of the pump clicking and rattling as it came to life. It wasn't digital, just the old rolling numbers spinning behind scratched glass. He watched them climb, the hose vibrating faintly in his hand. When he finished, Bud was waiting by the door with a paper receipt. "You driving far?" he asked. "Dallas. Long way to go tonight. Not much between here and there but the dark." Tom smiled, a little uneasy now. "Yeah, I'll make it, thanks." "Sure thing," Bud said. He held the door open as Tom paid in cash. The man's fingers were cold, dry like paper. "Drive safe now. Roads can fool you out here." Tom nodded, got back in his car, and drove off. In the rearview mirror, the light above the pumps flickered again, and then vanished as the highway swallowed him up. He drove for another few hours, found a small motel outside Wichita Falls, and crashed for the night. The next morning, after breakfast and coffee, he realized he'd left his wallet at the gas station. He'd tucked it under the seat when paying and must have forgotten to grab it again. The thought hit him like a punch. His license, cards, everything. Cursing, he packed his things and headed back. It was about 70 miles out, but he remembered the turnoff. He followed the same route, the same cracked road, past the same scrubland and lonely trees. Only this time, when he reached the bend where Bud's Gas and Go should have been, there was nothing. No pumps, no sign, no light. Just an empty lot with a crumbling concrete foundation and weeds growing up through the cracks. The dust of years lay thick on it undisturbed. He stopped the car, heart hammering, got out, walked slowly across what had once been the drive. He could still see the faint rectangle where the building's walls had stood, the dark patches where the pumps had been bolted down, but everything else was gone. There was a county road sign nearby, so he drove back to the next town, a tiny place called Memphis. He pulled into the sheriff's office, a low brick building that looked older than it was. Inside, a man in uniform looked up from a newspaper. "Help you?" he asked. "Yeah," Tom said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I fueled up at a place last night, Bud's Gas and Go, about 20 miles west of here. I think I left my wallet there, but when I went back, it's just gone. Like totally gone. Building and everything." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Bud's Gas and Go?" "Yeah, that's what the sign said." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Son, that place burned down in '82. Lightning strike hit the pump, caught the office on fire. Bud Pritchard died in it. Been abandoned ever since." Tom stared at him. No, that's impossible. "I was there last night. I met him. He filled my tank." The sheriff frowned, studying him like maybe he was drunk. "You sure it was there? You sure you weren't on Route 287? There's a new station down near Esteline." "No," Tom said quietly. "It was that one. I saw the name on the sign. He was wearing a shirt with his name on it." The sheriff was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Show me where." They drove out together in the sheriff's cruiser. When they pulled onto the dirt shoulder where the foundation lay, the old man just sighed. "This it?" he asked. "Yeah," Tom whispered. "Right here." The sheriff got out, hands on his hips. "Been this way near 40 years, he said. "You can still see where the tanks blew. County never cleaned it up." Tom walked to the middle of the lot. Something caught his eye, a faint blackened shape in the concrete like an old burn mark. Near it, half buried in the dirt, was a piece of metal. He brushed the soil away and lifted it. It was a pump handle. Rusted through, brittle but still intact. The sheriff came closer. "That's from the fire," he said. "They left it." Tom turned it over in his hand. His fingers came away dark with ash. Then he froze. His car keys were in his other hand, and hanging from the ring was a receipt. He didn't remember putting it there. He unfolded it carefully. The paper was brittle, yellowed with age, the ink faded but still readable. Bud's Gas and Go at the top. And beneath it the date, July 17th, 1982. He looked at the sheriff, who was staring at the paper now too. The old man's face had gone pale. "Where'd you get that?" Tom didn't answer. His mouth had gone dry. He looked back toward the horizon, where the station had stood. The wind was moving through the grass, whistling softly through the cracks in the concrete. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. The sheriff took the receipt gently from his hand. "You should go on back to town," he said quietly. "Ain't nothing good comes from staying out here after dark." Tom drove away without another word. He didn't look back this time. But miles down the road, when he stopped at a diner for coffee, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. His gas gauge hadn't moved. The needle still pointed full, exactly where it had been the night before. When he reached Dallas, he parked in his driveway and shut off the engine. For a long moment, he just sat there staring at his hands. Then he looked at the passenger seat, and there it was, an old glass candy jar, the same one that had sat on Bud's counter. Inside, the candy was melted into one sticky mass. He never went back that way again. But sometimes, when he drives at night and the road is empty for miles, he swears he can see the glow of a neon sign out in the dark. And if he looks too long, he thinks he can make out the sound of a gas pump ticking faintly just behind him. There's a place west of Wichita Falls where the road runs flat and straight for miles, slicing through fields that look empty until dusk. The hanging bridge sits out there, a one-lane stretch of rusted iron and splintered planks that crosses a narrow river called the Holler Creek. Folks driving out that way say the bridge hums at night, a low trembling sound that starts deep in the metal and rises like a moan carried by the wind. The old-timers call it the echo of the noose, and they don't say that with a grin. They mean it. Most people don't go there after dark. It's not that anyone's seen ghosts exactly, but every story in the area begins the same way. Some fool kid with a flashlight and a truck, daring his friends to cross it when the moon's up. Sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. That bridge was built in 1934 during one of those New Deal projects that were supposed to bring work to small towns. The workers were local men, the kind that had gone broke when the oil fields dried up. They built it quick and mean, using leftover steel from a derailed freight car. The bridge didn't have a name until 2 summers later, when a man named Roy Benning was hanged from it by a mob that thought he'd killed a rancher's daughter. No trial, no sheriff, no nothing. The story goes that they used a cotton rope and tied it to the top beam, right above the middle of the span. They left him there till morning, swinging slow over the creek. That's when the name stuck, the Hanging Bridge. By the 1970s, the bridge was already half-rotted, but kids from Wichita Falls still drove out there to scare each other. One of those kids was named Alan Riggs. He was 17, had a black pickup and a bad streak. It was late August, hot enough that the asphalt stuck to tires. Alan took his girlfriend Dana out to the bridge to drink and smoke and look at the stars. They parked in the middle, right where the boards creaked and the water below was still. Dana said she heard something, like a humming that came from underneath. Alan laughed and said it was just the wind. But when he cut the truck's engine, the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, trembling through the planks like a heartbeat. Then the headlights flickered. Dana begged him to start the truck again. He did. But when he threw it into reverse, the back tires spun like the bridge was holding them there. That's when something hit the windshield, something that left a long streak of dust and what looked like hair. Alan gunned it and didn't stop until they reached town. 2 days later, Dana's family moved to Oklahoma. She never spoke to him again. Alan went back to the bridge a week later. He told his buddies he had to prove it was nothing. They found his truck 3 days after that. Engine still running, driver's door wide open, radio on static. No sign of him. The sheriff said maybe he jumped into the creek and got swept away. But the water's shallow there and they never found his body. People started saying the hum was Roy Benning's breath still hanging in the air. Some said if you stop your car in the middle of the bridge and turn off the lights, you can see a shadow hanging from the beam. Others say you'll hear whispering, like a rope twisting against metal. It became a dare, something kids whispered about at parties. But the grown-ups, they stayed away. Even the farmers wouldn't cross it after sunset. I didn't believe any of it until last year. I was driving home from a job in Wichita Falls around midnight. I'd taken a detour through the back roads because the main highway was closed. My GPS must have been off because I ended up on a dirt stretch I didn't recognize. I saw the sign, Holler Creek Bridge, and it didn't register until I was halfway across. The air was thick, heavy in a way that made my ears ring. The bridge looked smaller than I'd imagined, just enough for one car framed by twisted beams and overgrown weeds. My headlights caught the reflection of old graffiti. Names, dates, a heart, a noose drawn in black spray paint. That's when I heard it. Not wind, not insects, but a low hum, like metal straining under weight. It wasn't steady. It rose and fell, pulsing. The steering wheel vibrated in my hands. I thought maybe the car was idling weird, so I cut the engine. The hum stayed. It felt like it was coming from everywhere, under the floor, inside my chest. I rolled down the window. The night air smelled of wet earth and rust. Then faintly, I heard something else beneath the hum. It was a creak, slow and rhythmic, like an old swing moving back and forth. Then came the whisper. It was so soft I almost thought it was the trees, but there weren't any trees close enough. The voice was low, almost a breath, saying something I couldn't catch. I tried to start the car. The engine clicked once and died. The hum grew sharper, angrier. I could feel it through my bones. I kept turning the key, and with each turn the hum got louder, until it became a sound that wasn't a sound, more like pressure pushing against my skull. Then something hit the roof, a single thud that shook the glass. I froze. It came again, harder. I looked up, and the ceiling above me dented slightly, dust falling from the seam. Then came the scraping, like something dragging across metal. I didn't think. I just grabbed the door handle and ran. The night outside was darker than it should have been. I could barely see the edge of the bridge. I ran toward the other side, shoes pounding on the wood. Halfway across, I stopped because the boards under me started to hum again. It wasn't coming from the bridge anymore, it was coming from below, from the water. The surface rippled even though there was no wind. I swear I saw something rising, a shape, dark and swaying, just beneath the reflection of the moon. It looked like a man hanging upside down, but when I blinked, it was gone. The hum cut off all at once. The silence was worse. I made it to the dirt road, turned back just once, and saw the headlights of my car flicker on by themselves. They stayed on until I was out of sight. A tow truck pulled the car the next day. Mechanic said the battery was fine, but the engine block had cracked clean through. He asked if I'd driven it into something, maybe dropped it. I told him no. He didn't say another word, just gave me back the keys and looked at me like he wanted to but couldn't ask more. I didn't tell anyone what really happened, but when I drove past that area a week later, there was a new sign on the fence before the bridge. It said closed, structural unsafe. Someone had spray painted beneath it in red. It hums. I still hear it sometimes when I can't sleep. That same low vibration, like metal straining in the dark. I've tried to tell myself it's memory. Tinnitus, maybe the sound of my ceiling fan. But last night around 2, I woke up to that same hum. It wasn't in my ears. It was outside. I got up and looked through the blinds. The street was empty, moonlight on the asphalt. But the sound, it was coming from my truck sitting in the driveway, a steady tremor rising from the chassis. I watched the door locks rattle on their own. Then for just a second I saw something in the rearview mirror's reflection, a rope swinging slow, and underneath it, the outline of a man's face stretched and still, lips barely moving. I didn't go outside. I just stood there listening. The hum never stopped. It started as one of those stories old troopers tell over late coffee, half to scare the rookies and half to see who believes in ghosts. Route 9 ran straight through the flat, wind-burnt land outside of Jasper, Texas, where the pines thinned into pasture and the air turned still after midnight. The road wasn't much, just 2 cracked lanes and a faded yellow line. but it had a way of swallowing sound. Patrolmen said that when you drove it between 2 and 4 a.m., you could hear your own heartbeat louder than your engine. The first report came in 2002. Officer Glenn Parrish was on a routine sweep, heading east toward the county line, when he saw her. A girl in a white dress no older than 20, standing by the mile marker near the turnoff for Lake McMillan. She had long blonde hair that caught the headlights like silk and a small suitcase at her feet. Glenn said she waved him down politely, smiling as though she'd been waiting just for him. She told him her name was Marlene and that she'd been visiting friends out near the lake. She asked for a ride home, which, she said, was just a few miles past the county line. Glenn obliged, said she smelled faintly of lilacs and rain. They talked a little, quiet things about the night, about how lonely the road felt. Then, as he crossed the small bridge that marked the county border, she disappeared. Not screamed, not jumped, just vanished. The passenger seat went cold and her suitcase was gone. Glenn pulled over, heart pounding, light sweeping the empty asphalt, no trace. He drove back thinking maybe she'd slipped out unnoticed or he'd imagined it, but there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone walking. The next morning, he filed his report anyway. The sheriff told him to get some rest. A year later, a different deputy named Mendez saw her too. Same spot, same hour, same polite smile. He picked her up, skeptical but curious. Said she was quiet, watching the dark fields roll by like she'd missed them. She told him her house was on Birchwood Road right after the county line, but when they crossed it, she was gone. Mendez swore her seatbelt was still fastened when she disappeared. By the time the seventh sighting happened, even the locals started calling her the vanishing hitchhiker. Drivers on Route 9 would sometimes leave flowers by the marker where she was said to appear. A few teenagers went out there to prove it was nonsense. Some came back laughing, others pale and shaking, claiming they'd seen a flicker of white in their rearview mirror. I first heard the story from my uncle, who'd been a patrolman in Jasper County for 22 years. He was the kind of man who didn't spook easy. But the night he saw her, something in him changed. He told me about it once, years later, his voice rough as gravel. It was late October, the air thick with the smell of pine sap and diesel. He was driving west on Route 9, windows cracked, radio low. Around mile marker 43, his headlights picked up movement. A woman standing by the shoulder. White dress, pale hair, suitcase by her feet. He slowed, rolled the window down. "You all right, miss?" She looked up, smiling faintly. Her voice was soft, polite. "I need a ride home." He hesitated. Everything about her felt out of time. Her dress looked like something from the 50s, her hair pinned in old-fashioned curls. But she looked real, tired, human. "Where to?" he asked. "Just past the county line. Birchwood Road." She got in, setting her suitcase on her lap. My uncle said the air turned colder as soon as she closed the door. He tried to make small talk, asked if she'd had car trouble. She smiled but didn't answer, just stared out the window as the road unwound. When they crossed the bridge, she turned to him suddenly and said, "Thank you for the ride." Then she was gone. The car jerked as his foot slammed the brake. The passenger seat was empty, the door still locked from the inside. He swore he heard the faint sound of a woman's voice like a sigh fading into the wind. He drove straight back to the station and refused to take Route 9 for years after. There were stories before Marlene, too. Old newspaper clippings from the 1950s mention a car accident near Lake McMillan. A young woman killed on her way home from a dance. Her name was Marlene Cooper. The body was found the next morning, but the driver, a man named Thomas Reeve, had vanished. Locals whispered that he'd run off, but his car was never found either. Some said the lake took him. Others said she did. Over time, the stories merged. Some drivers claimed they saw a man standing by the water on foggy nights, motionless, watching the road. Others said that when you passed the lake too fast, you could hear a woman's voice calling from the trees. I didn't believe any of it until I saw her myself. It was early March 3 years ago. I'd been driving back from visiting a friend in Houston, took Route 9 out of habit to avoid the interstate. It was close to 1 a.m., the fog low and heavy. The world felt swallowed in silence. Then I saw her. White dress, suitcase, the whole damn cliché. My first thought was that someone was pulling a prank. Maybe some teenager looking for a viral video. But when she stepped into the headlights, I saw her face. Pale, calm, eyes too still. I pulled over. My chest was tight, but I couldn't just leave her there. "You need a ride?" I asked, forcing a smile. She nodded. "Home," she said softly. "Just past the county line." Her voice didn't echo. It was like she spoke straight into my head. She got in. Her dress looked clean but old, the lace fraying at the edges. She held her suitcase close, her hands perfectly still, the car filled with the faint scent of lilacs. I drove, trying not to look at her directly. After a few miles, I glanced sideways. She was watching me. Her eyes were too dark, like there was no reflection in them. "Where exactly on Birchwood Road?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "You'll see." When we reached the bridge, she straightened up. The air went cold enough to fog the windshield. She looked at me then, and for a second I swear her face shifted, just slightly, like water rippling. She whispered, "Tell him I forgive him." I blinked, confused. Who? But she was gone. The seatbelt hung loose, swinging gently. The car still smelled of lilacs. I drove on, shaking, until I reached the next gas station. The clerk looked at me like I was drunk. "You saw her, didn't you?" he said quietly. I didn't answer. He nodded. "They all do. Some nights she rides with the living. Some nights she's waiting for him." "For who?" I asked. "The one who left her on that bridge." That was the last thing he said before walking off, leaving me alone under the buzzing lights. A month later, they drained part of Lake Macmillan to expand the levee. Down near the southern bank, they found a rusted car buried in the silt. Inside were the remains of a man. The license plate was registered to Thomas Reeve. They buried him beside her grave, and for a while people said the sighting stopped. But a few months ago, a trucker reported picking up a girl in a white dress on Route 9. She smiled, thanked him for stopping, and asked for a ride home. He said she vanished the moment they crossed the county line. The sheriff didn't even bother writing a report. Said some things don't need explaining, but I still drive that road sometimes just to see. I slow down near the bridge, roll the window down, and listen. And every now and then, when the fog hangs low and the wind smells faintly of lilacs, I swear I hear a woman's voice in the dark, soft and patient, asking if I can take her home. In the far western edge of Texas, just where Val Verde County starts to blend into dry scrub and the distant shimmer of Mexico, there stands a dead oak that everyone in town calls the Tree of Keys. It's not marked on any map, not even the ones used by the game wardens or surveyors. You won't find it unless you take the old ranch road off Highway 90, the one with the rusted cattle gate half swallowed by cactus and barbed wire. The road winds for miles through country so empty you start hearing your own heartbeat, and then like something waiting in ambush, the tree appears out of the haze, gnarled and bleached white by the sun. Its skeletal branches heavy with hundreds of rusted keys. They clink in the wind like dry bones. People in Del Rio whisper about it, mostly in Spanish, mostly in bars after dark when the wind comes down from the canyons. Old ranch hands say the keys appear after storms. They hang from bits of wire or string, never new, always rusted, but if you touch one, it's warm. That's what the stories say. Some think it's a memorial, others a warning. But the truth about the Tree of Keys isn't something that fits neatly into rumor. It's older than the town, older than the highway, maybe even older than the first fence post ever driven into that patch of dirt. I learned about it from a man named Royce Henderson, who'd spent his whole life in Val Verde County and looked like he'd been carved from the land itself. Brown as the soil, eyes like river stones. I was in town researching a book on Texas ghost stories, the kind of thing that sold just enough copies to keep gas in my truck. Royce found me at a diner one morning and asked if I was the writer. I said I was. He said there was something I ought to see. Something not right. We drove out past the Pecos, through a stretch of desert where the wind sounded like voices moving under the sand. Royce barely spoke until we pulled up to a fence line, where the land dropped into a dry arroyo. The tree was visible from there, rising out of the ground like some enormous fossil. The closer we got, the more I realized how strange it was. The bark was gone, stripped clean. Keys of every shape and age hung from the limbs. Car keys, house keys, padlock keys, even the old skeleton kind. They turned slowly in the wind, chiming against each other. The sound was faint but constant, like breathing. Royce stopped about 20 feet from the trunk. "Don't go closer," he said. "Not yet." His voice was low, almost reverent. "You hear them?" he asked. I nodded. "They ain't supposed to be warm," he said. "Not metal left out in the sun like that. They're warm 'cause they remember." He told me his cousin had found the tree first years ago after a flash flood. Said he'd seen something shining out here and thought it was scrap metal. 2 days later, the cousin was gone. They found his truck, but not him. His house key was hanging from the tree a week later. Royce swore it. He said that's when he stopped coming out this way. Until the last storm. Another one showed up, he said. New key. I checked. It's my daddy's. His eyes filled, but he didn't blink. Been dead 20 years, I didn't believe him. Not really. I walked closer. The ground around the tree was littered with nails, bits of wire, and the occasional piece of bone. Coyote, maybe. The air smelled like rain even though the sky was clear. When I reached for one of the keys, Royce shouted, but I'd already touched it. It was warm, just like he said, almost pulsing. For a moment, I thought I heard something faint and far away. Metal dragging across concrete. Then my vision blurred. The key in my hand seemed to shimmer, and I could swear I saw movement in the reflection. A man's face, sunburned, terrified. He opened his mouth, but the sound that came out was wind. I stumbled back. Royce was watching me with a look of pure fear. Now you've done it, he said. You've marked yourself. He wouldn't explain. He just told me to get back in the truck. We drove to his ranch in silence, the sun dropping behind the hills, turning everything red. Before I left, he gave me a warning. Don't dream about it, he said. If you dream about it, you'll hear them calling. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the keys kept echoing in my head. I told myself it was just the wind, that I'd let the story get under my skin. But sometime after midnight, I woke to a faint clinking outside my motel window. I opened the curtain, and there, hanging from the railing, was a single rusted key on a piece of wire, swinging slowly in the breeze. My heart froze. I didn't touch it. Instead, I wrapped it in a towel and drove straight back to Royce's place before sunrise. When I got there, the house was dark. The front door was unlocked. I called his name, but the only sound was the ticking of a clock somewhere deep inside. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with his head down, a half-finished bottle of whiskey beside him. His skin looked gray, his eyes empty. Around his neck hung a key, the same kind that had appeared outside my window. I tried to shake him awake, but he was cold. On the table was a note scrawled in pencil. They don't stop. They want what's theirs. I called the sheriff. They said Royce had been sick for weeks, probably heart failure. They didn't find any key on his neck, though I swear I saw it. I left town that afternoon. I didn't even check out of the motel. I just drove east until the sun came up. But no matter how far I went, I kept hearing that sound, the clinking. And every time it rained, every time a storm passed, I dreamed of that tree, its branches' heavy keys twisting in the wind. A few months later, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a key, old, rusted, the head shaped like an oak leaf. I didn't need to touch it to know it was warm. I threw it into the river near Kerrville and told myself it was over. But yesterday, after a thunderstorm rolled through, I heard something faint in my backyard. Hanging from the pecan tree by my fence was that same key, dripping rainwater swinging in the wind. Now I think I understand what Royce meant. The keys aren't just metal. They're invitations or maybe promises. Each one belongs to someone who's been taken, someone who touched the wrong thing, someone who listened too long. The Tree of Keys isn't just a place. It's a mouth waiting to be fed by the storm. And when the wind rises over Val Verde County, when the sky splits open and the rain hits the desert dust, that dead oak wakes up and starts whispering again, searching for new hands to mark. I hear it even now, faint but steady, coming closer with the thunder, the sound of metal turning against metal, a lock searching for its key. Deputy Mark Ralston's patrol car was a 12-year-old Ford Explorer that rattled like a shopping cart every time he hit a bump on Highway 90. He'd been meaning to get the dash radio looked at, but the county budget didn't stretch that far anymore. Not since the floods had wiped out half the roads in Kerrville. On that particular Friday night, rain slicked the asphalt in silver streaks under the headlights, and the wipers dragged across the windshield with a sound like sandpaper. It was close to midnight when the radio started crying. Not static, not interference, a crying. At first it was faint, like someone sobbing under a pillow. Mark glanced at the radio, thinking he might have brushed against the tuning knob. But the frequency was dead air, the same emergency band they always kept it on. Then the sound grew louder, clearer, a woman's voice breaking apart between gasps. It wasn't coming from dispatch. It wasn't any signal he recognized. It was raw, wet human crying, echoing in the confined cabin of his car. He reached for the mic. "Central, you picking that up?" Static answered. The woman's sobs went on, rising into a choked scream before cutting off altogether. Then silence. Mark's stomach turned cold. He pulled over onto the shoulder, tires hissing on wet gravel, and sat there in the rain, staring at the dashboard lights. The radio clicked again. A faint voice whispered through the static. It sounded like, "Please, help me." Mark froze. He was a veteran, 15 years in the department, 3 as a deputy sheriff before that. And he'd heard things that could crawl into a man's dreams. But nothing like this. The voice trembled, begging again. It wasn't a call for help. It was a confession of despair. The kind that makes you feel like an intruder just for hearing it. "Who is this?" He said into the mic, his voice cracking. For a moment, nothing. Then through the hiss of static, a child's voice answered. "It hurts." The sound punched through his chest. He turned the volume down, but the crying persisted. Faint now, like it was inside the wires, whispering through the circuitry. Mark turned off the ignition. The engine died. The lights went dark. The crying didn't stop. The radio had no power, yet the sobbing continued in the silence. Mark stepped out into the rain, breathing hard, his boot sinking into the muddy shoulder. The night was empty except for the hum of insects and the distant rumble of thunder. He walked around the vehicle, shining his flashlight on the wet road. No other cars, no signs of movement. He climbed back inside, shaking. The radio was quiet now, the frequency blank. He sat there for a while before driving back toward town, his thoughts crawling over themselves like spiders. He didn't mention it at the station. You didn't talk about hearing voices through dead channels in a place like Kerr County. You just didn't, but 2 nights later it happened again. This time, the crying started as soon as he crossed the bridge over Harper Creek, the same spot where, 5 years earlier, a mother and her little girl had gone over the railing in a flash flood. He'd been one of the first responders. They'd only recovered the mother. The girl, 7 years old, had vanished downstream, never found. Mark had nightmares for months afterward, dreams of little pink shoes bobbing in brown water. As the radio began to sob again, the memory surged like bile. The girl's name had been Abby. He remembered the way the mother screamed when they pulled her from the water, clawing at the rescuers, shouting her daughter's name. He turned the radio off, but the crying only grew louder, higher pitched. The voice of a child this time. He gripped the steering wheel and shouted, "Stop it!" The crying ceased. Then a small, fragile voice whispered through the static. "Why didn't you save me?" Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned off the whole dashboard, pulled the fuse from the radio, yanked it out with shaking fingers. Still the voice lingered, faint and hollow, like it was seeping through the vents. He drove back to the station, pale as paper, left the car running in the lot, and went straight to the duty sergeant. "I need another unit," he said. "Why?" "The radio's busted." "Take it to maintenance Monday," the sergeant said. "It's Friday night, Ralston. You can handle it." He didn't argue. That weekend, the crying followed him home. His wife woke to find him sitting in the living room at 3 a.m., staring at the silent police radio on the coffee table. "Mark, what's wrong?" she whispered. He shook his head. The radio was off, unplugged, but the faint sound of sobbing filled the room. Soft, distant, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. By Sunday morning, he'd taken the device apart. Every screw and wire laid out on the floor. He even threw the parts into the trash bin outside. But that night, the crying came from the baby monitor in the hallway. They didn't have a baby. Mark started drinking again. He'd been sober for almost 10 years. The bottles helped him sleep, but the dreams were worse. He dreamt of water filling the car, of tiny hands pressed against the glass, of a radio glowing underwater, broadcasting nothing but static and screams. On Monday, he drove the patrol car to the county garage and demanded a replacement. The mechanic popped the hood, fiddled with the wiring, and said, "Looks fine to me. Probably just picking up interference from the old flood warning channel." Mark didn't argue. He didn't say that the crying had called him by name. That night, he was assigned to patrol near the lake. The storm clouds hung low and the water was black as oil under the headlights. The new radio, brand new, factory sealed, began to hiss softly. Mark stared at it. "Don't," he muttered. "Please, not again." A faint sob echoed through the speaker. Then the voice of a child. "You left me." He slammed on the brakes. The radio crackled louder, the crying turning into a wet, gurgling sound like water filling lungs. Mark grabbed the mic, shouting, I tried to save you." The lake rippled outside the windshield. The engine stalled. The headlights dimmed. The air inside the car grew cold enough to fog his breath. Then, through the mist on the inside of the windshield, a small handprint appeared. He backed out of the car, stumbling, flashlight trembling in his grip. The lake was calm again, but something moved near the shoreline. A shape, small and hunched, hair plastered to its head, water dripping onto the mud. "Abby," he whispered. The figure turned. In the brief flicker of lightning, he saw her face, pale, bloated, eyes black as ink. The same pink raincoat from 5 years ago clung to her body. Her mouth opened, and the sound that came out wasn't human. It was the same distorted wail that had haunted his radio. Mark ran for the car. The door slammed shut on its own. The radio's light flared red, and the voice of the dispatcher came through for the first time in days. "Unit 14, what's your status?" He tried to answer, but his throat locked. The only sound was the sobbing, not from the radio now, but from the back seat. When they found the car the next morning, it was parked at the edge of the lake, engine dead, doors locked from the inside. The radio was still on, broadcasting faint, intermittent crying. They never found Mark Ralston. 2 weeks later, another deputy took over the same unit. The county garage had replaced the wiring, installed a new dash system, even scrubbed the interior. On his first night patrol, the new deputy flipped the radio on. It was silent for a while. Then a small, wet voice whispered through the static, "Help me." And somewhere deep in the black water of Harper Creek, bubbles rose and burst against the surface one after another like laughter. Highway 287 runs long and lonely between Wichita Falls and Amarillo. 200 miles of scrub, wind, and forgotten towns that never fully died but never quite lived either. Somewhere near the halfway mark, west of Electra and north of a place that barely makes the map, there's a stretch of cracked pavement where the weeds poke through and the dust never settles. It's there, just past an old gas station that's been stripped for copper and glass, that you'll see it. A motel sign, big, rusted, leaning a little, still glowing faintly blue. There's no motel there anymore. Hasn't been for 30 years. But sometimes, when the moon's low and the air feels electric, the travelers who stop say they can see lights turning on behind invisible curtains. I heard about the sign from a trucker named Leon, sitting next to me at a diner in Vernon. He was pale as paper, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking so bad he couldn't pour his coffee. He told me he'd pulled over near midnight to get some rest and saw the blue glow up ahead. Said it looked like a vacancy sign from another world. When he got closer, he realized there was nothing but empty foundation and dust, but the glow stayed steady, buzzing like an insect against his windshield. Then he saw movement, curtains fluttering in a window that wasn't there, a woman's silhouette. He got back in his rig and didn't stop till Amarillo. The story stuck with me. I was working on a piece about roadside America, the dying towns and empty motels that used to be full every summer, the romantic loneliness of the road. So one night in late September, when I was heading north with too much time and not enough sense, I decided to find the sign myself. It was almost midnight when I turned off onto the frontage road. The desert stretched flat and gray under a waning moon. My headlights caught the bones of old buildings, gas stations, auto shops, a diner with its windows punched out, the kind of ruins that make you feel like the world ended and nobody told you. Then I saw it. The sign was taller than I expected, maybe 20 feet, with faded lettering that once read Blue Creek Motel. Only the word motel still had power, each letter trembling in a weak blue light that painted the sand in ghostly hues. I parked about 30 yards away and shut off the engine. The buzz was loud enough to hear through the silence. There was a foundation still visible, a concrete slab littered with bits of tile and glass. The desert had started reclaiming it, tufts of dry grass growing through cracks. I walked around with my flashlight, half expecting to find old plumbing, maybe the outline of rooms. The air was so still that even my footsteps sounded like whispers. Then from somewhere near the center of the slab came a sound, soft, rhythmic, like something tapping against metal. I swung the light that way and caught sight of an old key rack lying face down in the dirt, its numbered hooks still attached. The tapping was one of the tags swinging in the wind, though there was no wind at all. When I reached down to touch it, the tag felt warm, almost pulsing. That was when I noticed the light. Behind me, near where the lobby would have been, a glow had started to shimmer in the air, faint at first, then stronger. It looked like headlights seen through fog, except it wasn't fog. It was shape. Walls made of air and light, forming faint outlines of a building. For a moment I thought it was my eyes playing tricks. But then the shapes moved. Doors, windows, curtains swaying. The lobby appeared first. I could see a counter, a row of mail slots, a potted plant in the corner. The outlines filled in with color and shadow like someone was painting the world back into place. Behind the counter stood a woman, maybe in her 50s, hair pinned up, wearing a light blue uniform, blue. She was solid but washed out, like a figure trapped in static. I should have run, but curiosity rooted me. "Evening," she said. Her voice was thin and distant, as though coming through an old radio. "Need a room?" I tried to speak, but only managed a nod. She smiled politely and turned to take a key from the rack, except there was no rack behind her, only air. She reached anyway, fingers disappearing for a second before reappearing with a brass key dangling from her hand. "Room 7, she said, facing the pool. I glanced behind her and saw the faint shimmer of water, a pool that shouldn't exist rippling under the same unnatural light. My mouth went dry. "How much?" I managed to ask. She tilted her head, confused, as though I'd spoken in another language. "You already paid," she said. Then she looked past me toward the highway. Her smile faltered. "You shouldn't stay long. They're restless tonight." Before I could ask who she meant, the light flickered. The lobby dimmed, then brightened again. I heard footsteps in gravel, lots of them. When I turned, the empty lot was filling with people. They came from nowhere, forming out of the air like mist condensing into flesh. A man in a sleeveless shirt, a woman holding a towel, a kid dragging a beach ball. All of them walking toward invisible rooms, their faces dull and pale. I stood frozen as they moved around me, their eyes glazed, their lips murmuring words I couldn't make out. Then one of them turned to me. A man in a blood-stained undershirt, maybe mid-30s, eyes black and hollow. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. His voice wasn't threatening, just weary, like a warning. "It's feeding time." I stumbled backward. The lobby light pulsed faster, the blue from the sign flaring until the whole place was bathed in electric glow. The people froze mid-step. One by one they turned toward the pool. The surface of the water began to churn, though no wind touched it. Something was rising from below, dark and formless, bigger than any man. I ran. I didn't even look back at the car. Just sprinted across the sand till my lungs burned and the glow behind me shrank to a dot. When I finally turned, the sign was the only thing left, buzzing faintly, the letters flickering in rhythm with my heartbeat. There was no building, no people, just the empty lot again. I got in the car and drove until dawn, straight through to Amarillo. I didn't tell anyone for weeks, but curiosity is a sickness, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went digging through local records, found that the Blue Creek Motel burned down in 1973. Electrical fire, they said. 12 people died, including the owners, a couple named Arlen and Doris Mayfield, and several guests who couldn't get out because the doors were jammed. The bodies recovered were charred beyond recognition. The weird part was the report about the sign. The fire department noted that even after the blaze consumed everything, the neon sign kept glowing blue for another 3 days. When they finally shut off power to the grid, it went dark. Nobody ever reconnected it. Yet travelers kept reporting the glow for decades afterward. I tried to tell myself it was just a remnant, some freak electrical current, maybe a reflection from the highway lights. But late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still see that woman behind the counter, her face lit by the ghostly hum of neon, whispering that they're restless tonight. Last week, a man from a travel blog called me. He'd read one of my old pieces about haunted roadside stops. Said he was heading out that way, wanted to check out the Blue Creek Motel story. I told him not to. I told him there was nothing left to see. He laughed and said that's the point. 2 nights ago, he sent me a text, a photo of the sign glowing bright blue against a black sky. He'd captioned it, You were right, no motel here, but something's still awake. That was the last I heard from him. His phone goes straight to voicemail now. And last night, driving home through the rain, I passed a field just off 287. For a second, I saw lights flickering behind curtains that weren't there, and a figure standing by the road holding something small and metallic. When my headlights swept across, I caught a glint, a key dangling from her fingers marked with the number 7. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. But in my rearview mirror, for miles afterward, I could still see the faint blue glow buzzing through the storm, waiting for the next traveler to come home. A state trooper named Harris found the photograph on a wet Sunday morning, just outside El Campo, Texas. The rain had finally stopped after 2 straight days of storms, and the air carried that heavy, electric scent of soaked earth and diesel from the trucks rolling past on Highway 59. The ditch beside the road was swollen with brown water, littered with beer cans and scraps of plastic that had washed down from somewhere up the line. Harris almost didn't notice the Polaroid. It was stuck face down in the mud near a piece of broken headlight glass. He picked it up without thinking much, wiped it on his pant leg and froze. It was a photo of a family standing in front of a 1-story ranch-style house, probably somewhere in the same county. A man, a woman, 2 kids, a boy and a girl, all smiling. But the strange thing, the thing that made Harris lower the photo and look around the empty road, was the shadow. A long, crooked silhouette stretched over the family from the bottom of the frame. It was the shadow of whoever took the picture, still holding the camera up, frozen in the act. And the shape didn't look quite right. The arms were too long, the fingers like wires. He took it back to the station in Wharton, figuring it was nothing more than a lost photo from a storm-scattered glove box. He logged it, tossed it in a folder on his desk, and forgot about it. But that night he couldn't sleep. His dog started barking at the back door around midnight, hackles raised, tail stiff. Harris looked out and saw nothing but rain still dripping from the eaves and the dim orange light of the street lamp, trembling on the wet pavement. When he went back to bed, the photo came to mind again. The way the family smiled so wide, the way the photographer's shadow seemed to stretch right toward them like it was reaching. By the next morning, the photograph was gone from his desk. The file folder still sat there, a faint square of cleaner wood marking where the picture had been. He asked the other deputies if they'd moved it, but no one had touched his things. When he checked the evidence drawer, he found something else. 3 Polaroids, not 1. They were spread neatly on the counter as if someone had laid them out for him to see. Each showed the same family, but not the same moment. In the second photo, the mother wasn't smiling anymore. In the third, the father was turned toward the house, his hand half raised like he was trying to signal something behind the lens. And that shadow, the one holding the camera, seemed closer. Harris drove out to El Campo again. The rain had finally drained from the ditch, leaving the mud cracked and pale. He followed the roadside fence toward a dirt turnoff he hadn't noticed before. It led back through the trees, a tunnel of dripping oak branches and rusted signs. The air was still thick, heavy with the smell of mildew and stagnant water. After a mile, the path opened into a clearing where a house sat, small and slumped. The roof caved in on one side. It was the same house from the picture. He parked, got out, and called out, "Sheriff's Department." His voice seemed to get swallowed by the trees. The grass was tall, unmowed for years, and a half-buried tricycle poked from the dirt near the porch steps. The front door hung half open. Inside, the air was stale like old wood and rain rot. Furniture was still there, though it looked untouched for a long time. A stack of newspapers from 1989 sat on the counter. Harris looked around with his flashlight until he found the living room. There were picture frames on the wall, each one holding an empty white square where photos had been torn out. He thought of the Polaroids again. Something scratched above him. He pointed the light toward the ceiling, but the sound stopped. He took a step closer to the hallway where a family portrait hung crooked. Only now the glass was shattered, and faint streaks of something dark had run down from the frame. He took the photo out. It was the same family, the same clothes. But this one had no shadow, just the 4 of them smiling under a blue sky. Outside, the wind picked up. The trees started to move, though the air still felt heavy and trapped. He heard a faint mechanical click, the kind old cameras used to make when the shutter fired. He turned. There was no one there. Just the porch and the weeds and the dirt road leading out to the highway. He walked back to his cruiser, heart thudding harder than he wanted to admit. When he reached for his radio, he noticed the Polaroid lying on the passenger seat. Not the one from before, but another new one. This time it showed the front of his car. The same scene he was standing in, down to the dent on the fender and the mud on the tires. But standing in front of the cruiser, almost invisible in the glare of the flash, was a faint figure, long and thin, its face just a blur of reflected light. The shadow in the photo stretched out behind it, reaching straight toward where he'd been standing when the picture must have been taken. Harris drove back to the station with his lights on, though there wasn't any traffic. He didn't tell anyone what he'd found. He didn't even file a report. He just locked the photos in a drawer and tried to forget. That night, the barking started again. The dog wouldn't go near the windows. Around 2 a.m, Harris heard a car door slam outside. He looked through the blinds and saw the flash of headlights across the street, but no car there. Just an empty road shining under the moonlight. The next morning, Deputy Ortiz found the front door of Harris's house open. The cruiser was parked in the driveway, engine off, keys still in the ignition. On the seat was another Polaroid. It showed the inside of Harris's kitchen. He was sitting at the table, hands flat, staring at something across from him. The photograph had been taken from his own point of view, as though someone stood behind his shoulder with the camera. After that, things got stranger. Over the next few weeks, people along the county road started finding Polaroids in odd places, taped to gas pumps, wedged under windshield wipers, stuck to fence posts. Always the same family, always with that creeping shadow. In some, the faces looked blurred or stretched, like the people were moving just as the flash went off. In others, their eyes seemed to glint too bright, as if reflecting light that wasn't there. Then one afternoon, a boy named Kyle was walking his dog near the same ditch where Harris had first found the photo. He came running home to his mother with a picture in his hand, crying. It was a photo of him, standing right where he was when he picked it up. Behind him, faint in the background, was the shadow. The dog started whining that night and wouldn't stop until morning. The sheriff's department went back out to the house. It was gone. Not burned, not torn down, just gone. Where the clearing had been was a stretch of flat dirt and new grass, as if nothing had ever been there. But when they dug a little, they found things. Glass shards, a melted light fixture, a handful of photographs that had fused together in the soil. The top one showed nothing but blackness, like the lens had been covered by something dense and alive. By winter, the story was local legend. Truckers passing through said they sometimes saw a flash in the trees along the highway, like a camera going off. People from Houston came down hoping to find a piece of the haunted ditch. Some claimed they did. Most just went home empty-handed, but one thing stuck. Every few months, someone new would bring in a photograph. Always a Polaroid. Always the same look. Slightly overexposed, yellowed edges, that long, warped shadow stretching across the ground. In one, you could make out a sheriff's cruiser parked on the shoulder. In another, a faint reflection in the side mirror showed a man's face, pale and hollow-eyed, looking back at the lens. The film stock used in those photos hadn't been sold since 1991, and no one ever found the camera. It was near midnight when the first call came into dispatch. A simple report of an abandoned police cruiser sitting on County Road 9, lights flashing in the fog. The caller said the engine was still running, doors wide open, radio crackling. No one had seen the officer. It wasn't unusual for patrol cars to stop on those back roads, but the way the caller described it, parked at an angle, driver's door open, headlights piercing into the brush, set a quiet unease in the air. The responding unit, Officer David Carson, was one of the more seasoned deputies in Pine Hollow County, a small stretch of rural Texas caught between forgotten oil fields and ghost towns. He knew that road. It snaked through miles of dry scrub, isolated barns, and mesquite trees that grew too close together. It wasn't a place people lingered after dark. When Carson arrived, the cruiser was exactly as reported. Engine running, doors open, headlights cutting through the heavy mist. The number painted on the side was Unit 47, belonging to Officer Tom Renner. Carson had known Renner for years. Solid cop, former Marine, always kept his patrols by the book. The driver's seat was empty. The radio squawked every few seconds with static. Carson stepped closer, noticing something odd. Renner's body cam light was still blinking red on the seat like it had been manually detached. He called out, "Tom? You out here?" No answer. Only the low rumble of the idling engine and the distant chirping of crickets. Then faintly, the sound of gravel shifting somewhere behind the trees. Carson drew his flashlight and followed the sound. He expected to find maybe a drunk or a stranded driver. Instead, what he found were footprints. Muddy, deep impressions circling the cruiser in a wide arc. They were large, heavier than Renner's size, and they didn't lead away from the car. They just looped around it again and again, overlapping, like someone had been pacing the cruiser for hours. Carson counted at least 3 full circles, then saw where the tracks stopped abruptly near the trunk. That's where he noticed the smell, something metallic, sharp, faintly sweet. Blood. He found a smear of it along the back bumper, half-dried, as though a hand had brushed against the paint. He called it into dispatch, requested backup, but his radio kept cutting out, static drowning the signal every few seconds. He could hear the dispatcher faintly saying his name, then nothing. Just that endless crackle. He backed away, eyes scanning the tree line, feeling a strange pressure in his ears like the air itself was thickening. The fog had crept in heavier now, rolling low over the road. He stepped toward the cruiser to shut off the engine. That's when he noticed the body cam light blinking faster, recording. He picked it up and clipped it to his vest, planning to review it later. But curiosity got the better of him. He tapped the button and the screen flickered to life. The footage began normally, Renner driving, dashboard lights illuminating his face. He was calm, humming some country tune. Then his radio crackled. A female voice, faint, whispering under the static. It wasn't the dispatcher. Renner frowned, tapped the mic, asked her to repeat. No answer. The camera jolted as he pulled the cruiser over. The timestamp was 11:42 p.m. He got out, shined his light into the darkness, calling out, "Hello?" Like he'd seen a person on the road. The camera caught movement, something pale just at the edge of the beam, darting between the trees. Renner followed it, muttering that it was probably a deer. But the voice came again, louder now, close to the mic, though Renner hadn't spoken. It whispered his name. The footage turned shaky after that. Jerky steps, flashlight beam bouncing across the road. He circled the cruiser once, then again. On the third circle, his breathing picked up. He said something under his breath that sounded like, "There's 2 of them." The light hit what looked like a shoe print beside his own. Then he turned suddenly, as if hearing something behind him, and the camera caught only darkness and the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps closing in. Not his, not running, just walking. Then the feed cut out. Carson stopped the playback. The air felt colder now, like something had shifted in the night. He placed the body cam on the dashboard and tried the radio again. Still nothing. He climbed into the cruiser to write down details for his report. That's when he heard it, the faint crunch of gravel outside. A slow, dragging sound like someone walking along the road just beyond the headlights. He leaned out the open door, flashlight sweeping across the fog. "Tom, is that you?" The sound stopped. Then from somewhere near the back of the car, a low whisper. Not a voice exactly, but something shaped like one. It came again, closer this time, almost under the cruiser. Carson stepped back instinctively. He crouched and aimed the light beneath the car. Nothing. Only the dust shifting in the beam. But when he stood up, the passenger door that had been closed was now wide open. He knew he hadn't touched it. The dome light flickered weakly, then went out. His heart started hammering. He reached for his radio one last time, and through the static came a single burst of sound. The same whisper from the body cam, a woman's voice saying his name. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. 2 deputies and a highway patrol officer. They found Carson's cruiser parked beside Renner's, engine still idling. Driver's door open. Carson was gone. The dash camera footage from his car showed him standing beside the open door, flashlight raised, staring toward the trees. Then the video glitched, froze for several seconds, and resumed, showing only the empty road. His body cam was recovered later, found half buried in the dirt 50 feet away. The footage began with him calling for backup, then panning the flashlight across the fog. There was something moving in the distance, tall and slender, stepping slowly toward him. He whispered, "What do you want?" Then faintly, the sound of several sets of footsteps circling him faster and faster, until his breathing turned into a scream and the feed cut off. The cruiser and both body cams were sent for forensic analysis. The techs reported something strange, interference patterns in the video that didn't match any known electrical source. A faint low-frequency hum beneath the audio like distant breathing. Dispatch logs showed both Renner and Carson's radios transmitting fragments of their last calls simultaneously, despite being made nearly 10 minutes apart. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead. Unofficially, the department stopped patrolling County Road 9 after dark. The sheriff said it was because of road conditions, but everyone in Pine Hollow knew better. Months later, a rancher found a tire half buried in the brush near that same stretch of road. It was a police-grade tire, serial number matching Unit 47. Around it were more footprints circling the spot in a wide arc. None of them matched human measurements. Every so often, late at night, truckers driving that route say they see the flashing lights of a cruiser sitting just off the shoulder, engine running, door open, fog rolling through its beams. They say if you slow down, you'll hear footsteps crunching in the gravel, keeping pace with your tires. And if you stop, really stop and listen, you might hear a woman's voice whisper your name. It started the year the fog came early to the edge of Highway 281, rolling down from the hills before sunrise, thick as wool and quiet as sleep. The locals said it was the coldest October in 40 years, and the cows on the Weaver Ranch were the first to sense something wrong. They began refusing to graze near the north fence line, just where the pasture dips before the road. They'd stand there 20 yards off, lowing softly like they were warning each other about something. At first, Dan Weaver thought it was coyotes. He strung up new wire, patched holes, and left out a lantern one night to see what was spooking them. But the next morning, the lantern was out, the wick soaked with dew, and there were small barefoot prints in the mud near the fence. A woman's prints, he thought. Narrow, long, the kind that sink deep at the heel like someone walking slow. Dan mentioned it at the feed store, half joking, but the old-timers didn't laugh. A few of them looked at each other like they'd been waiting for this. That stretch of road between the Weaver's land and the abandoned gas station had always had stories. Fog too thick, lights that didn't belong to any car, shapes in the ditch. But most folks brushed it off as tricks of the headlights. That changed one Tuesday morning. A trucker named Jesse Gorman was heading south before dawn when he saw her. He told the sheriff she stood by the fence line, just barely visible through the fog, wearing what looked like a nightgown. Pale, with dark hair down to her waist. She wasn't waving or moving, just staring toward the road, lips moving like she was talking to someone. When he slowed his rig, the CB radio filled with static so loud it made him wince. He said her mouth kept moving, but there was no sound. When he blinked, she was gone. By noon, everyone had heard. Dan went back that night, shotgun under his arm, and parked his truck near the same stretch. He left the headlights on, fog lights cutting through the mist. The world seemed to shrink around the glow. Around 3 a.m, he saw her, standing there right where Jesse said she'd been. Same white dress, same dark hair. He stepped out of the truck, called out, "Ma'am, you all right?" She didn't answer. Didn't move. Just stood there facing him through the fence, lips barely moving. The fog thickened until he could barely see his boots. He took a step closer, and that's when the cows started bawling, loud, panicked. He turned back toward the sound, and when he looked again, she was gone. After that night, Dan stopped mentioning it. But his son, Tyler, told his classmates about it at school. Teenagers being what they are. It wasn't long before a few of them drove out to the fence one night to see her for themselves. They brought a camera, beer, flashlights. At first, it was all jokes and dares filming the empty road. But around 2 a.m, the fog came in. Thick and sudden. They said it felt colder than it should have been for October. Then one of them, a girl named Brandy, pointed toward the field and whispered, "There." The footage was grainy, but you could see her, a figure at the fence line. White dress fluttering, though there wasn't any wind. Her face couldn't be made out, just a blur, but you could see her head tilt, her lips moving. The video ends with the camera falling into the grass and a long scream before the screen cuts to black. Brandy didn't show up for school the next day. Sheriff Holcomb found her car by the fence, door open, headlights still on. They combed the field, but there were no tracks, no sign of struggle. Only a small patch of wet earth near the fence, smelling faintly of iron. After that, no one went near the place. The Weavers fenced it off tighter, but the cows still wouldn't graze within 50 feet of that line. And every time the fog came rolling down the hills, people driving by said they'd see her, standing in the same spot, staring toward the road. Some said she was crying, others said she looked angry. By winter, the story spread past the county. A few ghost hunters came, recording their shaky videos and whispering theories. Some claimed it was the spirit of a woman killed in a car wreck decades ago. Others said she was a mother looking for her child, who drowned in the creek half a mile down. But no records matched. No accident reports, no missing persons fitting her description. One man, a retired deputy, said he'd found something once. An old case file from 1962 about a woman named Evelyn Hart, who lived near that same stretch. She'd been reported missing by her husband. They said she'd walked out one foggy morning and never came back. Her husband shot himself a week later, leaving only a note that read, "She keeps calling from the fence." The deputy had burned the file years ago, said it was better forgotten, but when he heard the new stories, he started drinking again. Folks found him in his trailer one night, TV still on, his eyes wide open. His last words, according to his neighbor, were, "She knows we see her now." The state sent people to test the soil, thinking maybe a chemical leak was causing hallucinations. Nothing turned up. But strange things kept happening. Engines dying near that mile marker. Radios cutting out. Dogs whining and backing away when the fog rolled in. Then came last spring. A couple from Austin took a wrong turn heading to Marble Falls. They stopped on that road to get their bearings, fog thick as milk. The wife saw her first, a shape by the fence. She told her husband to drive now. But before he could shift into gear, something hit the side of the car. Not hard, but enough to make the metal groan. When he looked out the window, she was there, inches away, eyes black as oil, mouth open in a silent scream. Her face was pale, skin slick like something drowned. The man floored it. They didn't stop until they hit town. When the sheriff found them later that morning, the woman wouldn't speak. The man kept repeating, "She's waiting for someone." She thought it was us. They left Texas within the week. By now, people avoid that stretch entirely. The county even put up warning signs. Low visibility area, do not stop. But sometimes you still see taillights slowing in the fog. Sometimes, if you listen just right, you can hear a soft voice through the static, calling from the fence line. And if you ever find yourself driving that road on a foggy night, you might notice your radio go quiet for a moment. You might glance out and see a shape standing in the mist facing the road, lips moving soundlessly. If you do keep driving, don't slow down. Because those who stop, those who try to listen, never seem to make it home. In early spring, the city of Brentford, Texas, decided to repave a stretch of Highway 19 that ran along the outskirts of town, just before the bend near the old church and the abandoned drive-in. It wasn't much of a job, just a resurfacing project to fill potholes and cover the cracks from years of brutal summers and colder than usual winters. The crew was small, local men mostly, working out of a rented trailer parked near the tree line. The work was supposed to take a week. It didn't even make it through 3 days before something went wrong. It started when the jackhammers hit something they shouldn't have. They'd been breaking through the outer layer of asphalt when one of the foremen, a man named Dale McCord, heard a sound unlike the usual crunch or scrape of old roadbed. It was hollow. Not just hollow, metallic. Like they'd struck the roof of a tank or a pipe, far bigger than anything in the county's utility plans. He called for the work to stop, thinking maybe they'd hit an old storage line, something from the war years when fuel depots and field stations were common. But when they brought in the magnetometer from the county yard, it didn't register as pipe. It showed a flat, wide mass, metallic, yes, but thin, more like plating than any infrastructure. They started digging a little wider around the area, pulling up chunks of asphalt and clay, and that's when they heard it. A low, dull knock from somewhere beneath the metal. It came once like the echo of a hammer, then again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, measured, deliberate. Nobody said a word for several seconds, just stared at one another while the air around them felt suddenly heavier. Someone tried to laugh it off, said maybe it was vibration from a truck on the highway. But there were no trucks just then. The road had been closed off. They pried back a section with a crowbar and shovel. Underneath the metal was a thin layer of compacted dirt. When Dale leaned closer, pressing his ear to the metal, he could swear he heard a faint rhythm like tapping mixed with a murmur or something else, something moving. He stepped back, pale. By that evening, the county inspector came out. His name was Harold Green, a man with a stiff collar and the temperament of a funeral director. He listened to the crew, looked at the exposed patch, and frowned when they played him the recording one of the men had taken on his phone. The knocking came through clearly, slow, deliberate, almost conversational. Harold told them to stop work until the morning. He'd make some calls, get an engineer out to check for old military storage bunkers. Everyone agreed. That night, though, two of the crew stayed behind to drink by the trailer. Ricky and Nolan, both young, both too curious. They kept joking about the thing under the road until the beer made their nerves loosen. Sometime after midnight, they went back out with flashlights and tried to peel up more asphalt. Nolan said later that the metal underneath had started to feel warm. Ricky put his ear against it, laughed, and said it sounded like breathing. That was the last clear thing Nolan remembered. The next morning, the foreman found Ricky gone and the patch of road completely collapsed inward like something had caved from underneath. They called the sheriff. They called the state highway office. The area was cordoned off and Harold Green showed up again looking like he hadn't slept. They brought in a small backhoe to clear the debris. Beneath where the asphalt had collapsed was an opening, about 3 feet wide, sloping down into darkness. The metal wasn't a roof or a tank, it was a kind of hatch. Old but clean, as if something had kept it from rusting. When they shined a flashlight inside, the beam went down farther than it should have, showing what looked like steps cut into the earth and then something smooth beyond them. The state man who arrived the next day ordered the hole sealed until a geological team could survey it. But no one could get the noise out of their heads. That slow knocking rhythm, even when the machinery was shut off, it seemed to pulse faintly through the ground, traveling under the soles of their boots, coming up through the metal equipment, faint but constant, like a heartbeat in the soil. By the end of the week, Brentford's local paper ran a small story about delays due to underground anomaly. The story was buried between an article about a church bake sale and a missing dog. The highway was fenced off. Dale was told to send his crew home. He did, though not without protest. He hadn't been sleeping. None of them had. He said sometimes he'd wake in the night and hear the same rhythm in his house, echoing faintly through the air vents. Knock, pause, knock, knock. 2 nights after the site was closed, Harold Green's truck was found on the side of Highway 19, engine running, door open, hazard lights flashing. There were muddy boot prints leading from the driver's side door to the edge of the repaving site. The prints stopped abruptly near the asphalt cut. No sign of Harold. No sign of anyone. When the sheriff's deputies looked down into the hatch again, the hole was deeper than before, as if the ground had swallowed more of itself. The metal lip was bent inward, melted or warped like it had been pulled. Weeks went by. The county quietly filled the hole with concrete and sealed it under a new layer of road. They claimed it was an unstable underground void, the result of erosion. Dale moved away not long after that, said he couldn't take the sound anymore. His wife told neighbors she'd caught him out in the yard one night, digging near the foundation, muttering about hearing something under the house. Then in June, a trucker passing through the bend late at night called the sheriff's office about someone knocking from under the road. The dispatcher laughed it off as fatigue, but when the crew went to check the next morning, they found a crack spreading across the fresh pavement. The same rhythmic knocks echoed faintly if you put your hand on the surface. They patched it again. A week later, the asphalt bulged like a blister. By late summer, Highway 19 was rerouted entirely. Too many accidents, too many stories. People said engines would stall near the bend. Others swore they saw faint lights under the road at night, moving like headlights beneath the earth. The state eventually buried the whole section under layers of fill and concrete barriers. It's been years now. Most of the crew are gone or won't talk about it. Dale drank himself into the grave in a motel outside Waco. Nolan never left town but refuses to drive that stretch. Every once in a while, on hot nights when the tar softens and the air hums with cicadas, locals say you can still hear it if you stop your car and kill the engine. 3 knocks, steady, from somewhere deep below the asphalt, then silence, until it starts again. It started with the sound of tires on gravel, faint and drawn out like a whisper sliding across the dawn. Highway 60 had been abandoned for almost 20 years, ever since the bridge over Cutler Creek had collapsed in 2004. The state never repaired it, and the road simply fell off the map. Grass grew through the cracks, signs rusted into unreadable relics, and the only traffic left were crows, coyotes, and the wind. So when people began talking about seeing 3 white church buses traveling that forgotten stretch at sunrise, most assumed it was another small-town legend. There were enough of those floating around West Texas to fill a book. But legends don't leave tire tracks in the dust. I was living in Dickens County at the time, running a bait shop near Lake Trammell. My name's Frank, and back then I didn't believe in much. I'd lost my wife to cancer, my faith to grief, and most of my customers to bigger stores out on the highway. Nights were long and empty, and I had a bad habit of listening too closely when people talked about strange things. That's how I heard about the buses. The first story came from a trucker named Vince who stopped in for coffee around 5 one morning. His hands were shaking so bad he spilled half of it on the counter. He told me he'd been running a shortcut down the old road trying to save fuel when he saw them. 3 white buses, no markings except faded crosses on the back windows. They drove slow in perfect formation. No sound from the engines. He followed them for maybe 5 minutes before they crested a hill near the Cutler turnoff and vanished into thin air. No lights, no dust, nothing. Just gone. By the time a week passed, 3 more people had seen them. A sheriff's deputy, a pair of surveyors, and a woman delivering newspapers out of Spur. Every story was the same: 3 buses, dawn light, silence, and sudden disappearance. The details matched too closely for coincidence. That kind of consistency doesn't happen with small-town gossip. I decided to see for myself. On a Friday night in early October, I packed a thermos of coffee, a camera, and my old .38 just for comfort, then drove out toward the closed stretch of Highway 60. The sun had barely set, and the sky was that purple-red color that makes everything look like it's burning. The air smelled of mesquite and old dust. I parked near the road closed sign and sat in the cab of my truck waiting for morning. The night was still, so quiet that the ticking of my cooling engine sounded like a clock in a tomb. Around 4:30, a fog began rolling across the plain, thick as wool. It came from nowhere. The weather report had promised clear skies. My headlights caught bits of it swirling like smoke, and the world outside turned ghostly white. That's when I heard it, the crunch of gravel somewhere ahead. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. 3 sets of headlights materialized out of the fog, glowing dimly yellow, moving in a slow, steady line. My breath caught. The first bus emerged, its paint dull and cracked, the words St. Mary's Baptist barely visible under grime. 2 more followed, identical except for smudged numbers painted on their sides. They made no noise at all. Not a hum, not a rattle, not even the squeal of brakes when the lead bus slowed at the curve. They glided like boats across still water. I grabbed my camera and took a photo, but the flash bounced back in a blinding burst that lit up the fog and nothing else. When I lowered the camera, the buses were closer. I swear I hadn't seen them move. Just closer, maybe 50 feet away now, lined up side by side on the cracked asphalt. My first instinct was to start the engine and get the hell out of there, but curiosity won out. I stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting into my face. The buses idled in silence. I couldn't see inside. The windows were fogged or maybe tinted dark. The front doors were shut tight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty road. No answer. Then, as if something heard me, the middle bus door creaked open. The sound was like an old coffin lid lifting. Inside was darkness, thick, absolute, unnatural. I took one hesitant step closer and smelled something foul drifting out. A mixture of mildew, gasoline, and something rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. I raised the camera again. When I clicked the shutter, a shape appeared in the doorway. For a split second I thought it was a person, thin, wearing a tattered choir robe, but the face was all wrong. Too long, too pale, with eyes that seemed to sink backward into nothing. It tilted its head and the robe moved as if something beneath it was crawling. I stumbled backward, dropping the camera. The bus's headlights flickered once, twice, then all 3 revved at once. Not with the sound of engines, but with a low, vibrating hum that I felt in my bones. The fog around them began to swirl faster, drawn toward the buses like water down a drain. The shape in the doorway stepped out onto the road, followed by others moving in jerky, unnatural motions. That broke my paralysis. I jumped into the truck, turned the key, and floored it. The tires screamed as I tore back toward the highway. The rearview mirror showed only fog, but I kept thinking I could hear that humming chasing me like a swarm of bees. By the time I hit paved road again, the fog was gone. So were the buses. When I got home, I locked every door and drank until sunrise. The next day, I developed the film at the old pharmacy in town. Every photo came out blank except one. The one I'd taken when the first bus appeared. The image showed 3 buses, all right, but they were transparent like reflections in water. Behind them, where the fog had been, I could make out faint silhouettes of people standing in rows, their heads bowed as if in prayer. I showed the photo to the sheriff. He told me to stop spreading nonsense. Said if I trespassed on the closed road again, he'd fine me. I didn't argue. 2 weeks later, a group of high school kids from Spur went missing. Their last text messages mentioned they were out bus hunting on Highway 60. The search team found their truck at the Cutler Bridge, headlights still on, doors open, but no sign of them. Just tire tracks in the dirt, 3 sets running side by side, ending abruptly in the middle of the road. People don't talk about the buses anymore. The state finally fenced off that whole section of road. But sometimes on foggy mornings, folks driving near Lake Trammell swear they see shapes in the mist. 3 long shadows gliding across the water, faint crosses glowing on their backs. And once in a while, around sunrise, I still hear the hum, soft, distant, and moving closer. I found the bike where the creek pinched to a narrow bend behind the old feed store, where the water went dark and slow under a sycamore that had been struck by lightning long before I left town. The frame was furred in moss, chain drooping like a diseased necklace, spokes grayed with silt and spider webs. The seat shouldn't have been anything but cold and cracked, but when I touched it, my palm flinched. It was warm, and not the kind of warmth you explain away with the late October sun. It was the kind that clings, like a hand has just lifted. Beside it lay a child's sneaker, blue with a Velcro strap, pressed freshly into the mud, the tread crisp, the imprint cupping a little crescent of water already turning the color of tea. There were no other prints leading away, not even a hint of dragging or slipping, just one shoe that looked like it had been pressed into place by something careful and deliberate. The wind through the reeds made that high whisper I remembered from summers before everything went sour. Before Dad's belt and Mom's thin sighs and my brother's habit of staying out so late, the cicadas sounded like they were sawing through my skull. The town beyond the bend carried on its low noises. A semi-upshifted on Highway 59. A screen door snapped shut somewhere near the laundromat. A dog barked in 3 staccato bursts like a warning fired over a bow. I had been back in Hickory Ridge for 2 days. That was all it took for the place to unspool me, which is the reason I swore I'd never come back. I'd taken the long way from Houston, past Shepherd's Pie billboards and a Buc-ee's whose lot looked like an airport runway, past pastures where the cows stood in water up to their knees, past dead armadillos curled like busted helmets, past the low white crosses at the edge of bar ditches that mark what Texas calls grief. My mother's house needed clearing. She died in July and I had run out of excuses by October. The realtor wanted closets emptied. The lawyer wanted signatures. The house wanted air. This is what the house gave me instead. A cracked photograph wedged behind a storm window in the shed, showing a boy on a bike at this very creek, a grin that tilted as if it didn't trust itself, eyes that had not yet learned to squint. My brother, Joel. He had disappeared 25 years ago in the summer of '99, a year that clanged like a lid on a pot. The official line was that he ran. The unofficial line was that he was taken. The line we did not speak was that the creek took him like it took every hot night that didn't have rain, like it took cigarette ends and beer cans and the last good feeling in our house. There had been a search, then casseroles, then church, then silence. My father drank enough to put an echo in his lungs. My mother talked to the radio when she thought no one could hear. I left after graduation and never came back except once for a funeral, and I drank enough that I don't remember who died. My hand still held a film of warmth from the seat. I wiped it on my jeans and watched the low current. The creek was swollen from a week of rain. Snags were moving under there, pale as knuckles. There was a smell that didn't belong to water or mud or the feed store. It was sweet and metallic, like coins sucked clean in a child's mouth. I should have called someone. The sheriff's office would send a deputy with boots and a clipboard. He'd look at the moss and the shoe and then at me and ask if I'd been drinking. The last time I tried telling this town something, it told me to hush. I crouched and touched the shoe. The mud around it dimpled as my fingers pressed the edge. I could feel the ridges of tread under the slick layer, as if the child's foot were still in there, as if I might pinch something living. The size of it sent a small rush of nausea up the back of my tongue. 5 years old, maybe 6. A foot that should have been kicking the back seat and asking if we were almost there yet. The cigarette burn scar on my wrist itched the way it does when I am close to something I promised myself I'd never touch. There are places in East Texas where the land is all at once too much and not enough. Too many trees crowding the sky, but somehow no shade where you need it. Too much water, and yet the grass brittle as paper. Hickory Ridge sits in one of those hollows, ringed by pine and dotted with rust. A town that gets all its news from church, gas station gossip, and the rare bad thing that makes the Shreveport TV stations. The creek lines it like an old seam. There's a culvert under the road where the water sounds like a throat clearing. As a kid, I carved my name into the concrete there with a nail I found in a plank. Joel carved his right below mine in letters neat enough to make mine look like a tantrum. Every time I drove over that culvert since, part of me braced for the car to fall through. A dragonfly lifted from the bike's handlebar, wings taking wet light with them. The left handle grip had cracked and peeled, a curl of rubber listing like a tongue. I stepped toward the sycamore and peered into the undercut where the bank folded under itself. Slime hung like curtains. An old tackle box with a cartoon base wore a fringe of algae, and something that might have been hair, though I told myself it was just fishing line. The air had a temperature that didn't belong to the day. I could feel it in a thin line along my jaw and the tendons up my neck, like someone was drawing a wire carefully through me. I looked back toward the feed store. The yellow light over the door was on even though it was early afternoon, a habit old places have, a superstition against weather. Mr. Ramsey owned it when I was a kid, a man whose pickup had a gun rack and whose eyes had a floating cloud in the left one that I remember staring at the way kids stare at bandages. He's gone, I knew that. The store belonged to his son now, a man my age with a belly and a polite laugh that clattered on the floor. The kind of man who would call me sir even if he'd thrown rocks at my house when we were 12. This town likes to lay a sheen on memory and call it improvement. The shoe in the mud made a soft sound, the smallest pull, like the mud sighed and caught its breath again. I froze. It was the absurd, undignified freeze of a man who knows he has no business at a creek crouched over a stranger's child's shoe. I told myself it was the water settling. I told myself a leaf fell and disturbed the surface. I told myself a lot of things that sounded like old furniture being dragged around in an empty room. I picked up the bike by the handlebar, my fingers coming away green. The back wheel lifted out of the water with a sluggish reluctance, shedding brown and long strings of weed. The chain sagged with the shift. I smelled that sweet metallic again, closer. The rear fender had rusted through in a thin oval, and in that oval was a shine, a patch where no moss had taken hold, like a thumbprint rubbed clean. I set the bike back down, careful, and then I did the thing people always shout at the screen about. I stepped into the creek. The first shock of cold ran up my calves and grabbed the backs of my knees. The silt swallowed my shoes. Something small and quick flicked past my ankle. I stood in the bend where I could look straight under the overhang and see nothing but a pale shift as the current decided what it wanted from me. The shoe in the mud had my attention like a hooked tooth. I reached for it, my hand moving a careful inch at a time, and the shoe slid deeper with a sound like a sucked breath. You can tell yourself a lot in a moment like that. You can say, I will not panic. You can say, I will not scream. You can say, I will not remember the summer of '99 when we hunted a missing boy with flashlights and found nothing but a damp patch of grass that smelled like pennies. I didn't scream, and I did panic, and memory stabbed me with the precision it always prefers. I saw Joel's bike, black and shiny, new on a layaway plan that meant the lights in our house stayed off for a week in July. I saw him wheeling it to the creek because he was stubborn enough to have joy where he should not. I saw my hand on his shoulder the last time I saw his back, the wet line where sweat had darkened his shirt, the way he shook me off like a dog shakes off fleas, not unkindly but decisively. The shoe slid again. It was small, but it had weight. It had the weight of things that make rooms go quiet. Somewhere a crow yelled and the sound bounced across water and brick and metal like something thrown. I pulled my hand back. The seat behind me radiated a patient heat. The rush that went through me then had a complicated flavor. It was fear, yes, a clean, bright kind. But it was also this sour, adulterated thing, something like recognition. I stepped backward out of the creek because I am not a hero and never was. The mud let me go with a reluctance that made me think of my mother's voice saying my name when I had a suitcase in my hand. I stood on the bank and watched the slow pulse of water where my legs had been. I looked back at town. No one was coming. No one had seen me. I could walk back to the car, drive to my mother's house, sign papers, and be a good son in the tidy way that satisfies offices. I could do that and leave the bike and the shoe as a private arrangement between the creek and the kind of loss that likes to be left alone. If you want to know the truth, that is what I decided, and that should tell you the quality of the man telling you this story. I bent to stand the bike up against the sycamore because leaving it sprawled like that offended a particular corner of me. That was when I saw the paint under the moss, a stubborn seam of black. My thumb found a spot and rubbed. The letters rose like bruises. Joel. He had scratched his name into the crossbar with a knife or a nail or a key, and then time had tried to erase it and failed to convince the part of me that matters. My throat closed, not with tears, which might have been decent, but with an old reflex that felt like learning to swallow again. The seat's warmth became not just a fact but a statement, the way a stove tells you without words that someone cooked something not long before you arrived. I did not want to know what. I did not want to ask whom. Behind me there was a soft, irregular ticking, and for a moment I thought it was a beetle or a tiny leak. Then I recognized it. Anyone who has spent time in a Texas shed knows it. A bicycle wheel turning a small measure, the freewheel pawls catching and releasing as it rocks. I did not move. I listened. The bike ticked a little and then was still, the sound swallowed by the water's talk and the flat hum of a distant transformer. I put my hand on the crossbar and felt a stable pulse under the metal. Not warmth, not the ghost of sun, a pulse as if the bike had a heart's dull patience, the hollow in my abdomen that grief had dug long ago filled with something I can only call pressure. I can tell you that I looked for tracks. I can tell you that I turned a circle until I made myself dizzy looking for a parent's shoe print, a larger foot pressed deep beside the small one. I can tell you that I shouted hello in a way that kept my voice as casual as I could make it, because I did not want to call what might answer. All these things are true and none of them matter. What matters is the fact that I knew, the way you know your own name in a dark room, that the creek had decided to resume our conversation. I dragged the bike up the bank to the higher ground where dry leaves held the day's heat. The moss smeared a green bruise on my palm. I meant to put it against the sycamore and walk away. That was the plan. But I stopped in the shade and a picture unfolded without my permission. It was a boy stopping to touch a water snake because it looked asleep. It was a hand on his shoulder, not mine, turning him gently but firmly toward a patch of water that did not shimmer the way the rest did. It was a mouth close to his ear, and a voice speaking a sentence so soft that even the cicadas could not remember it. It was the boy leaving a shoe like a stamp. It was a bike settled in a posture like waiting. It had been 25 years, and here we were, the creek and me, and I recognized the mechanics of it the way you recognize an old kitchen drawer by the way it sticks. When I say I am not a hero, I do not mean I have no loyalty. The part of me that was still a brother got loud. It did not say rescue. It did not say save. It said witness, which is a different assignment and one I could fulfill. I left the bike upright and walked the bank downstream, looking for any sign of small legs, any splash that did not belong to fish or debris. I found a beer can hosting a colony of ants and a Nerf dart swollen with water. I found my old initials faint on the culvert, and below them Joel's, and beside them a third set of letters I could not place that looked new, as if someone had stood there recently with a nail and enough patience. The letters were D-A-V-E-Y, the Y tailing off like a swallowed thought. I called the sheriff. I told him there was a child's shoe at the creek. I did not mention warmth or bicycles with pulses. He said he'd send someone and asked me to stay put. I said I would, and of course I didn't. I went back to the bike because I was not finished arguing with it. I put my hand to the seat again and the warmth was still there, but it had changed. It had a shape. It had two small hollows where sit bones meet material, a suggestion of weight that had lifted recently. I could have put my palm in each hollow and felt the shape of absence. I felt something then that I do not know how to fit into good language. It was not a vision. It was not a sound. It was a rearrangement of my understanding of the place I was standing. The creek bend became a room and the sycamore a door and the bike a chair someone had just left. I was not alone in the room, though I did not see the other occupant. The light over the feed store clicked, though I could not swear whether it turned on or off because it was already on, always on. A town superstition against the dark. The smell of coins got stronger. I thought of all the wishes people press into water and how the water keeps them, oxidized, unredeemable. I said Joel's name. It came out soft, a practice from childhood to keep our father sleeping. The other occupant of the room did not like that. The creek's surface dimpled. The shoe eased another fraction deeper. I said the name of the town. I said my mother's name because her voice had never gone where mine could not. I said the name carved on the culvert that I did not know. The dimple smoothed. I said please, and the word had the wrong weight, as if coins had replaced the syllables. A deputy's siren burped in the distance. The polite kind they use coming through town not to scare people pouring coffee on their porches. It sounded smaller and smaller until I realized it wasn't the siren at all. It was the creek making a siren of itself, rising and falling in a thin whine that made my molars ache. The sound resolved into the clicking of the bike again, more insistent, and then into the sound of a chain being pulled through a ring. I looked down and saw my reflection tilt and shiver and right itself. My face looked older than it should have in that water, as if the creek had added a decade for each year I had been gone. Interest charged on a debt unpaid. The thing about East Texas is that bargains dress in everyday clothes. A man will shake your hand at a yard sale, and you have no idea what he walked away with until you notice the weight missing from your pocket. The creek was offering me something, and the shape of it was the shape of the seat's heat. It got behind my sternum and leaned. I thought of my mother finding Joel's room cleaned but not emptied. Bed made too tight, window cracked as if air could solve what had happened. I thought of my father dead in his chair, TV glowing a football game into the curtains, his head settled forward like someone listening hard. I thought of a boy named Davy whose name had made fresh scratches. A pattern laid itself down and then turned itself over like a playing card. Everyone in a place like this knows that sometimes a mouth must be kept fed, and that there are kinds of feeding that don't show up on the shelves at Ramsey's. I did not say the next words out loud. I thought them, and the creek took that as eloquence. Take me, I thought, and give back what you took. It was not noble. I said it like a man buying back his own pawned tools. The warmth on the seat eased a little, as if nodding. The shoe in the mud rose a fraction so small that a person less prepared to see it would have missed it. The sound of the far siren grew real again and close now, and the deputy's cruiser turned onto the gravel, a plume lifting behind it like a genie returning to a cheap lamp. He rolled his window down and the radio spat static. He was a young man who had no reason to remember my name but did, because this town collects certain catalogs and keeps them handy. He said afternoon like a question. He saw the shoe, saw the bike, and his eyes went there and stayed. His hand went to his shoulder microphone, but he did not press the button. There's a script for this sort of thing, and he had learned it. I watched him decide which line to read. I said there's a child, but I couldn't finish. He said we'll find him, and made the mistake all small towns make, which is to think the verb we have is worth anything against an old appetite. He got out and his boots sank to the second eyelet. He swore softly because no one had taught him the more important words to say in such a moment. He looked at me and I saw he knew the creek was a room too, and that he had entered it without knocking. Behind him under the sycamore, the bike ticked with infinite patience. The warmth on the seat lifted like steam you can't see but you know is there because your skin finds it. The shoe in the mud rotated a degree and faced the bank instead of the water, a gesture like a child turning to listen. The deputy stopped. One boot stuck deeper than the other and made a choice I admired and resented. He reached for the shoe. The sound the creek made then was not a siren. It was a sigh of satisfaction from something that had been waiting to be asked nicely. The deputy jerked his hand back and stared, confused because his training had not covered gratitude expressed by silt. He said we need more people, radios, a line of hands, I agreed. We both knew that what we needed was older than any of that. The names on the culvert, the warmth, the neatness of Davy's letters, the way Joel had always made his bed, all of it aligned like fence posts when you finally stand in the right place and see the line. I walked to the bike. The deputy said, "Sir," because that is what men say to each other when they do not know how to say please stop. I took hold of the handlebars and the bike eased under my touch as if glad to be going somewhere. I put it at the very edge of the water's reach, front wheel facing the bend. I put my hand on the seat and felt nothing now but the faint indentation left by weight. I set my palm in it and it fit too well. I looked at the deputy and told him to keep his eyes on the shoe. He said yes because he was young and did not know how to say I think you are in the middle of something older than my badge. I took a breath that tasted like pennies. I thought of my brother's name in letters that time could not dissolve. I thought of a boy I had never met, a name scratched fresh, a mother somewhere washing a cup she would drop when the phone rang. I thought of how debts accrue and how some are paid off only by changing their shape. I sat on the bike. The seat met me like a hand on my back, warm again the instant I gave it weight, and the handlebars turned with a will I did not supply. The front tire slid forward, and the mud should have stopped it and did not. The bike rolled into the water as if the creek had poured a little road just beneath the surface. I heard the deputy shout. I heard my own voice say it's all right, which felt like a lie, and then in the smallest way like a promise kept. The water rose up my shins. The bike's chain did not bind. The moss under my thighs smelled like something being opened. I kept my eyes on the bend and the undercut and the place where the bank folded like a mouth between words. I did not see a hand. I did not see hair. I did not see my brother. I heard the smallest sound, the sound of Velcro unfastening, and the shoe in the mud came free and floated toward the deputy as if handed. The bike went under me then, up to the crossbar, then the handlebars, and still the pedals turned with that small authoritative click. My feet found the flats and I pedaled once, twice, and the water accepted me in a way it had not accepted me when I stood in it. The bend was a door. The undercut was a tunnel. The deputy yelled again and made a decision about his boots and the radio and whether he would explain a man drowning on a bicycle to a room full of people who would not believe him. There was a moment when I could have stopped. I could have put my feet down and stood in the chilling, and the deputy could have grabbed the bike and we could have dragged it to the bank and salted the seat until it was a normal piece of plastic again. The moment passed with the precision of a second hand sweeping over a dial. The creak took my knees, my thighs, my hips. The world tilted and filled with a sound like applause muffled by thick curtains. Underneath the water was not the brown blindness I expected. It was a dim room lit with a light that did not belong to the sun. The sycamore's roots braided the ceiling. The bike moved forward with the pleasant resistance of a treadmill, and I realized with a kind of gratitude that I was not struggling, that I had the energy to keep going. Ahead was a shape that was not shadow or stump, a suggestion of a boy's outline bent with concentration the way boys bend over a project they have been allowed to do without supervision. He did not turn. He did not need to. Recognition has no directions. I pedaled and the shape flickered, and when I reached the place where the flicker was, it was empty, the way a seat holds the echo of weight. I thought my name and then I thought his. The bike's frame thrummed like a plucked wire. The light shifted. The water, which had been sweetly cold, became warmer around my knees than my waist, as if I had entered a shallower run. I raised my head and the air took me back, mean and generous in equal measure. I was standing in the creek again, knee-deep, and the deputy was on his knees on the bank, holding a child whose hair stuck up in the back where a cowlick had decided a geography. The blue sneaker was on one foot and missing from the other. The child coughed in the uneven way children cough when they are surprised into breathing. The deputy said, "I've got you," and the boy said, "My name isn't you." And the deputy laughed the kind of laugh that shakes the hands of men and makes them forgive you everything. And he said, "Okay, Davy, okay." The bike's seat was cool under me. The warmth had gone like a fever that breaks. I put my feet down and the pedals would not turn. The chain hung like it had from the beginning, useless and rusted, the moss no longer smelling like anything but creek. The deputy looked up and saw me, and his mouth made a shape that meant he had decided I was not insane, not entirely. He mouthed, "Thank you," and I shook my head because it was not gratitude that belonged here. The boy cried then, the kind of crying that frees a room. He burrowed into the deputy's chest, and the deputy, more honest than I was, cried too. In the silence that followed, the creek went back to being water. A crawfish climbed over my shoe and decided I was uninteresting. A diesel engine sounded on the road. A woman far away called a name and then sounded relieved. I pulled the bike back to the bank. It was heavy now with the real weight of things that do not move easily. The letters on the crossbar were still there. I ran my thumb over them because I could not help myself. The indentations were familiar to the pad of my finger. They always had been. I set the bike down under the sycamore the way you set down a chair in a house where people have the good sense to sit. The deputy carried Davy toward the gravel lot. A second cruiser pulled in, and a third, and then a woman's sedan. Door opened before the car stopped, and a body making sounds that would embarrass it later, but that had no shame in that moment. And the boy saying "mama" with a ferocity that made the air seem like it had been missing something as simple as the name of a mother. There were towels. There were hands. There were statements pre-written by life that people inhabit when they need to survive the next 10 minutes. No one looked back at me, and that was correct. The creek had never taken anything without getting something it liked in exchange. Maybe this time, it had taken the opportunity to be remembered for mercy. More likely it had settled a larger debt. I walked to the culvert and put my hand on the concrete where the names were cut. The rasp was familiar. The new letters Davies had crumbled a little where the nail had bitten. The old ones had softened but not faded. I put my fingers into Joel's name and felt my throat give way finally, the way a dam gives in places no one can see. I said his name out loud again and the creek did not answer, because it had already done what it came to do. The sound went up to the sycamore leaves and out across the feed store roof and into the blue that was the color of a truth I should have learned earlier. I left the bike where it was, and the seat was cool now and would stay cool, and if anyone came to find it, the moss would peel off in their hands in unpleasant sheets. Ramsey's boy stood under the yellow light and smoked, his eyes squinting, and he nodded at me because this town knows how to nod at things it will not ask about. The deputy put the boy in a car that would smell like wet dog for a week, and a woman climbed in after him, and the siren going away was small and satisfied. I walked home along the creek because there are times when a road is too much like a story about order. The air had that flat taste of late afternoon. In the yard of my mother's house, the St. Augustine grass had overgrown the stepping stones, so that walking to the porch felt like wading. Inside, the rooms were the same and not the same, and the window in Joel's room was exactly as I remembered, cracked enough to hold a thread of air, just enough to suggest that air can save you. I stood in the room and did not touch anything because I had learned something about touching. I closed the window and it stuck at the last inch and then gave, and a draft went still like a held breath released. That night I dreamed in a way I had not in years. The dream did not offer me Joel. It offered me a seat that was warm and a name in metal and the specific relief of a child carried. I woke to a sound that took me a moment to place. It was a bicycle clicking, soft and intermittent, like a reminder that you can ride in place if you need to. I rose and went to the front door and opened it to the kind of October night that makes you want to make promises. The clicking faded. The creek went on saying what it has always said. I left the next day. I signed the papers. I told the realtor to make sure the window in the back bedroom stayed closed. He said, "Sure, sir," the way clerks do when they are agreeing to things they have no intention of remembering. I fueled up at a station that sold fried pies and wax paper, and listened to a man in line argue the weather with a stranger for the pleasure of it. I got on 59 and pointed the car toward Houston, and then toward whatever comes after Houston in any direction you choose. The road unspooled and the fences kept their secrets and the billboards promised the usual lies, and none of them were my problem anymore. When the highway rose to cross the Trinity, I looked right toward the long, slow gleam of water and thought I saw a black bike leaned against a cottonwood. But that is the sort of thing your eyes do when you let them. I placed my hands on the steering wheel and they were warm. A normal human warmth, the kind that comes from blood moved by a heart that has been reminded of its job. I drove and hummed an old song my mother used to sing when she ironed my father's shirts. A song about a place that isn't really a place. And the line that landed and held was the one about meeting you there someday. I do not go back to Hickory Ridge in anything but memory. I will tell you, if you ever find yourself near a creek that has learned human words and prefers not to use them, to pay attention to the temperature of what you sit on. If it is warm, ask yourself what is being offered and at what rate. If you are lucky, the debt it collects will not be one you mind paying. There is no moral here other than the one I have been trying not to write since the first sentence. The rust does not just come from water, it comes from waiting. It comes from hands that do not touch what they should have touched when it would have mattered. It comes from bikes left too long in rooms without doors, and from boys who learn to make their beds too tight, and from towns that leave lights on to hold off the dark and then forget to look, really look, at what the light is showing. If the ending disturbs you, be grateful. The ending could have been different. The creek has a collection of those too. They say the dirt road used to have a name, but no one I asked in San Angelo could remember it. The old-timers behind the register at the Allsups on Knickerbocker would shrug and keep bagging ice, and the deputy with the weathered forearms at the pump would look anywhere but at me. A rancher with a sunburned neck scratched his jaw and said, "You probably mean the track out by the windbreak." The one that slants off County Road 539 like a dead moth wing. If that's the one, you leave it be. He didn't smile. None of them did. You can tell a small town from a city by the way it handles a shared secret. In a city, secrets are currency. Out here, they are a kind of weather, something you live under and do not talk about unless it breaks your roof. I had been working nights for the county hospital, transporting blood and samples between outposts, running small errands that freed up the nurses. It was a patchwork job, stitched out of 100 little drives. I kept a cooler in the back seat and a paper atlas in the glove box, even though my phone had maps. Reassurance, I guess. The atlas smelled like cardboard and dust, and the ribbon marker left a faint red streak across my fingertips. Every run took me on the same loop in and out of town, past the river and over Loop 306, then further west to places where the mesquite thickened and the radio hissed at the edges. I did not believe in ghosts any more than the average person does when the air conditioning is on and the porch light is working. But the longer you drive after midnight in Tom Green County, the more the prairie starts to feel like it has a personality, something slow and patient and willing to wait you out. I first heard about the road from a nurse named Alma who had lived her whole life within 10 miles of the Concho. She loved sunflowers and had a nervous habit of popping the knuckles in her thumbs when she was thinking. That night I was late and she met me at the loading dock with a taut mouth and eyes that did not forgive. She pressed the cooler into my hands and said in a tone that made me think we were discussing a dog with a limp, "Do not miss the exit, and do not try to cut time on the dirt turnoff. People go missing out there." She said it like a sentence out of a book she had been made to memorize long ago. When I asked which turnoff, she said the GPS never sees you leave the highway. That is part of it. It makes your phone a liar, and then it makes you one too. There is a point on US 87 where the blacktop grows tired of itself, and the night feels a shade deeper. Maybe you know that point in other places, the stretch of road where your mind wanders and your hands on the wheel feel too large. Out there, the fields were a patchwork of scrub and rusting equipment, half swallowed by tall grass, the skeletal backs of old pivot sprinklers stretching away like the ribs of something that had died while crawling. Windmills, real and metal, spun with a complaint you hear in your bones more than your ears. On the left, a windbreak of salt cedar wrote the horizon with dark strokes. On the right, a barbed wire fence separated this from that and everything from you. If you were to stand there at noon, you might call it empty. Past midnight, you would be precise and call it waiting. The first time I saw the road, I was already an hour behind. The cooler was whining, and I imagined platelets clumping together like silt in a riverbed if I took too long. It was ridiculous, but some thoughts slide in and lock. The highway shouldered left, then right, a lazy pair of gestures. In the second of them, just when the reflective paint seemed to blur, the dirt road opened its mouth. It wasn't dramatic. It did not gape. It just existed. A pale gash that peeled away down into the mesquite like a whispered suggestion. No sign, no culvert. The grass at its edge was brushed back as if something large had passed through hours before. I glanced at my phone and saw the friendly ribbon still drawing US 87 like a neat vein. My blinker was an impulse. The cooler's whine felt louder. I told myself cutting across on county roads would save time. I told myself I'd grown up on gravel and dust and I deserved to trust my own wheels. None of those were real reasons. The real reason was that I felt a nudge, quiet and insistent, like a hand guiding me at the small of my back. I turned. The tires spoke the way they do on caliche, a brittle hush. The sage smell came up fast. The night tightened around the hood. It was easier to keep going than to fix it. The phone did not recalculate or complain. The friendly ribbon stayed on the highway, stubborn and sunny as if I had never left. I watched it for a moment, a calm lie, and then put the phone face down on the passenger seat and focused on the real world. If that is what you call it when something has you and you have not yet decided to object. Driving dirt is different than driving asphalt. Your hands are not so much steering as conversing, persuading. The little road wound between hummocks and nopal, then dipped through a dry ditch where old bottles lay neck down like worshippers. I kept expecting a gate or a cattle guard, some mark of ownership. But there was nothing but the wire to my right and the cedar thicket ahead. The moon was not quite full, a dull coin behind thin cloud. In its light, the dust hung like a thought you meant to finish and then didn't. I passed a mailbox without a name. You want me to be honest, I know. The box looked like it had never belonged to anyone at all, and the post was newer than everything around it. About a half-mile in, I began to notice the distance never changed. That is, a sleight of hand sentences do badly. Let me try it straight. The odometer ticked. The mesquite reached a little higher. The fence posts leaned and straightened. The road curved in a way you could not place on a map. I came around a squinting bend, and there was a trio of cedar stumps in exactly the same relation to each other as the last trio had been. It was like passing a stranger twice at the same end cap in a grocery store. I felt my skin tighten. The cooler complained, and I glanced at it again. I was 30 years old, and I told myself I was not a person who got spooked. The tires found a fresh set of ruts, and the steering wheel slid an inch in my hands as if someone had tugged it. I reached for the phone and tapped the screen. No change. The cheerful blue line still sang the highway song. The little car icon was still plowing forward where I no longer was. If that was not enough, the clock at the top had somehow found a way to remain 12:17. I stared until my eyes watered. My chest felt like it had been filled with cold laundry. When I looked back at the road, the dirt ahead was rising, climbing toward a low hill where a few rocks broke the surface like knuckles. I told myself that if I could get to that high point, I would see a farmhouse or a windmill or an old metal tank, and I would park and turn around in a sensible circle and go back to the highway and laugh at myself all the way to the hospital loading dock. You can hear the lie in that, as I heard it even then. The truck came up over the hill like a trick of scale. One moment the road was empty, and the next there were headlights scalloping the dirt and a grill with the shape of a smile but no warmth. It was a square-bodied Chevy, mid-80s, with a sun-faded blue paint job and a dually rear. The engine had that particular throat clear of a motor that has been tuned by hands that love it. I braked too hard. Dust rose and my seatbelt clocked me. The truck eased to a stop beside me, opposite on the narrow track, and for a moment our mirrors lined up and I could see my own face, pale and tight and too bright-eyed. Then the driver leaned forward into his own light and I could see him well enough. He had a long jaw and a mustache that had learned the habit of hiding his mouth. His cap bore the logo of a pest control company that no longer existed. I knew because I remembered the number painted on its side when I was a kid, running my finger over it while our own kitchen filled with chemical lemon. He raised a hand. It should have been a neighborly greeting. It read as a test of what I was willing to believe. I rolled down my window. The air that came in smelled like dust and wet metal, and a hint of something sweet that made me think of decaying mesquite beans. He said, "You look lost." His voice was the even tone of a man who has decided in advance you will agree with him. I said I was headed back to the highway. I said I had taken a wrong turn. The lies dressed like apologies. He nodded as if that matched a script he had memorized. He said, "It is easy to miss your lane out here after midnight." He said this road has a way of putting the same mile under your tires until dawn. I said that was funny, and my voice sounded like someone else's. He looked past me at the passenger seat where the map lay ignored under my phone. He said the map will not help. The phone will not help. They only know where you think you are. He gestured down the road without looking. If you keep on the way you're pointed, you will end where you began. If you try to turn around, you will run over something you did not see the first time, and that will become the reason you cannot stop. He said a thing like that with the confidence of someone pointing out that night follows evening. I asked what the way out was. He removed his cap and scratched at the spot where hair thinned, as if considering whether to add an extra line a third grader could follow. The way out is the last mile, he said. It does not bend. It does not appear for those who lean their ears for the wrong sounds. When you find it, you will know. You will feel the quiet lay along the fence, and you will feel the road harden under your wheels, as if it has made up its mind about you. Do not stop. Do not look in the mirror. Do not speak your name. Keep your eyes where you are going. The last mile will put you out on the highway like a seam. You will recognize none of it. That is fine. He put his cap back on. He looked pleased with the neatness of it. I said, "Who are you?" I said it without meaning to, because the shape of his mouth under the mustache kept shifting into someone I thought I knew. He smoothed the bill of his cap with his thumb. I was a person who took this road in 1991 because my brother told me it would shave a minute off my drive to pick up his kid from a sitter by the river, he said. I was a person who thought my mother's rosary in my pocket could be praised by moving faster. I was a person who saw a dog in the dust and swerved to miss it, and put my fender into a cedar stump and broke the tie rod, and bent something crucial and tore something soft under the hood. I became a person who stayed until dawn with my hand on the key and my foot on the brake, and my heart trying to prove it was big enough to leave me. He smiled then, and it was a shape I recognized too late, the school custodian who had held open the gym door when I was a boy. It flickered and became someone else entirely, a mechanic who used to eat breakfast at the Huddle House. The faces were like cards he could shuffle and lay out, and my head went light with the understanding that none of them belonged to the person in front of me. Before I could say any of what I was thinking, he put the truck in gear and eased around me, his tires finding a margin off the road where I would have bet 2 paychecks there was not a margin. He rolled down his own passenger window as his tailgate slid past my hood and said in a tone as light as a neighbor returning a borrowed rake, "Do not answer if something in the back seat asks you to." Then he was gone around the next soft bend, and after a moment I could not even hear his engine. I sat a long time. The cooler whined and then stopped and then whined again like a small desperate creature that had been disciplined into politeness. I shifted into drive. My hands were damp and I wiped them on my jeans and felt the grit stick. I eased forward. The road gave a little like a tired mattress. I did not know what I was looking for, and I did not trust my eyes to tell me if I found it. I watched the fence instead. The wire lifted and dipped between posts that did not agree on their angle. At some point the dip smoothed out, the blousy curves drawing tight like a belt pulled through a buckle. The air on my face cooled. The mesquite stepped back a measured pace. The dirt under the tires firmed and my shoulders dropped an inch, and I realized I had been holding them high as if to keep my head from slipping off my neck. The last mile, I thought. It felt like driving on something that wanted me gone. I kept my eyes on the hood. My name rose up to my tongue unbidden, and I swallowed it as if it had bones. I did not look in the mirror. No one called from the back seat. Instead, there was the softest suggestion of weight settling in the cushion beside me, a familiarity of someone slouching in a way they had always slouched. I smelled my father's aftershave, the cheap drugstore kind that stung the eyes if you stood too close. My peripheral vision filled with the sleeve of a shirt I had thrown away after the funeral, pearl snaps soft from 1,000 washings. I gripped the wheel and told myself the curve of the fence was all that mattered. My father spoke without moving the air. "You have always been poor at directions," he said in the voice he used when he was pleased with me and did not want me to detect it. I did not answer. The road laid itself down like a ribbon from a gift you regret opening. By the time I reached the highway, it was 4:33. The clock had decided to agree again. The lane ahead was empty except for a tumbleweed the size of a dog that skittered along the shoulder, and then caught on the wire and shivered itself into smaller ideas. I merged without remembering the check of the mirror or the glance at the blind spot. The phone's map woke up and acted like I had been right where I should be all along. The blue ribbon ahead curled around the city toward the hospital loading dock. I drove with a care that felt exaggerated and fragile, as if any sudden move would tear me. The wind through the cracked window smelled ordinary, warm asphalt and the memory of mowing. I laughed once out loud, to prove I still had a use for the sound. The nurse at the dock was not Alma. A young man with acne tracks down his cheeks took the cooler and told me I was late and made it sound like a grudging favor. When I said I had missed a turn, he looked at me with the pity reserved for people who cannot keep their own stories in one piece. I drove home along the river, past Lake Nasworthy, where night fishermen rested elbows on railings and let their lines be the bridges between who they were and what might happen. I slept with the light on without meaning to and woke with the taste of dust and lemon chemical in my mouth. If that were the end, you would tuck it in a drawer. But that is not the end. I told myself I would not take that road again. I told myself I had been tired and nervous and a person who likes to believe that a simple thing can be responsible for a complicated fear. Then Alma went missing 2 nights later after a late shift that ended at 12:03. They found her car not far from the windbreak, neatly angled onto the shoulder, the driver's door closed. The seat pushed back a fraction as if someone taller had made themselves comfortable. Her phone pinged off the tower along the loop until 3:10, then went still. At dawn, a ranch hand found a cooler beside a cedar stump and did not touch it, the way a man refuses to pick up a snake he has been told is harmless. I sat in my own car and stared at my hands until the knuckles whitened and the skin across them looked too tight. I told myself it was grief that made me go back. I told myself I wanted to look at the highway again and reassure myself it was all just dark and dirt. I told myself I might see the same truck and the same man and ask him, as if it were a reasonable thing to do, whether he had ever seen a nurse with sunflower earrings drive past. I told myself the last mile was always there for those who had already found it once. The truth is that it had never stopped calling. The quiet in my apartment had been wrong since that night, the air banded with something like pressure changes before a storm. I left at 12:01. The dashboard clock rolled from 12 now to 12:01 as I turned onto the loop, smooth as a coin flipping in a magician's hand. The highway was familiar as a scar. The windbreak was a darker line against a dark horizon. When the road peeled off again, the mouth a soft invitation, I did not hesitate. The phone pretended I had not left. The dust rose behind me and swallowed the faint lights of a distant ranch as if embarrassed for them. The road was itself. The fence watched me. The mesquite judged. Somewhere a nightbird made a sound like a nail dropped on concrete. I found the place where the last mile had begun before, and I waited for the wire to draw itself into a straight decision. It did not. The dip stayed sloppy, the posts lazy. The air stayed a degree too warm, and the road under the tires felt as if it were making up its mind, which is a particular way a surface can feel if it cares at all about you. I slowed. The cooler in the back seat did not whine this time. The passenger seat did not hold any borrowed weight. The smell was only dust and a hint of gasoline from a can someone had spilled years before. I rolled forward and felt the kind of attention you cannot name gather along my arms. Headlights crested the low hill ahead. My heart jacked. The truck eased down. The same weary blue, the same smile without warmth in the grill. It stopped opposite me, and the man leaned forward into his own light. Tonight he had my face. My mouth under the mustache was a shape I knew without a mirror. I saw the tired amusement I put on when someone asks me to explain what I do, as if that will make me belong to a thing with a job title worth repeating. I did not roll down my window, but the sound of the other cab came in all the same. He said in my voice, gentle, "The way I speak to people who are afraid of needles, you came back because you could not stand that the road did not need you to take it. You came back because you were not chosen. You came back because the last mile is not a door you can keep in your pocket." I felt the wheel in my hands as something living and tired of being touched. I said, "Where is Alma?" The other me shrugged. Alma found her last mile 20 years ago and has been walking it since. He said it without malice, and that made it worse. He looked at the seat beside him and then back at me and smiled with an affection that made my stomach lurch. He said the last mile does not always end at the highway. Sometimes it ends where a person deserves to be. His eyes were my eyes, and in them I saw a boy I had been, standing on the bank of the Concho while my father drank cheap beer and let me pretend the bobber's small motion meant I was good at catching things. The boy looked away from me with disappointment I had earned many times. The other me tipped 2 fingers from the brim of the cap. Then he rolled forward and slid past me with that same impossible grace, tires finding a strip of ground that did not belong to any map. I turned the wheel to follow and felt something bump under my right front tire. It was soft, and then it was not. The truck bucked, the way a dog flinches when it realizes the hand on its head is not friendly. I braked too late and too hard. The world filled with dust and sifted light and the smell of iron. I thought of a dog again, of swerving, of the man who had told me he had bent something crucial, and I let the idea land fully that the thing I had rolled over had not been put there by chance. In the rear view, because I could not help myself, I saw a dark shape that could have been a sack or could have been a person curled into a decision. The mirror gave it eyes. They opened and did not open. I told myself not to get out because the last mile is not found by the feet, and then the back seat released a quiet sigh, the sound a person makes when they let edge back into every part of themselves they had been holding tucked. I did not turn. I did not speak my name. The voice that came was my father's and mine and the man's from the truck and Alma's hidden in the consonants, and it told me with tired affection to go on. It told me the road would do what it had always intended, and that I was the last person to understand that intention had ever had anything to do with me. I drove. The fence did not straighten. The dips did not smooth. The air did not cool. The mile kept placing itself in front of me. The same shapes, the same trio of cedar stumps, each one looking a little more like kneeling people. The phone did not move from 12:17. The odometer ticked with a diligence I admired. The steering wheel warmed under my hands until it felt like pressing my palms against the back of an animal. I thought of dawn as something that happened to other people. I thought of San Angelo as a story I had told myself to make sitting alone in a car feel like a job. I thought of all the exits I had missed without registering them, each one a little door that someone else was gracious enough to hold for me. The last mile, when it came, was not a straightening of fence or a cooling of air. It was a kindness. the dirt smoothed without pretending to be a road. The night arranged itself so nothing would ask anything of me. The truck drifted the way a boat drifts when the person who had been holding it to the dock has let go. The voice in the back seat did not speak again. I did not need it to. I understood the simple mathematics of not returning before dawn. I understood that some roads end as gently as hands closing, and that a seam can be a place where two things join, or where something is sewn shut for good. I understood that Alma would not be where I thought to look, because none of us had been where anyone saw us last. The highway, when I reached it, held the shape of a memory someone else had told me so often I could now recite it. If you take that dirt turnoff after midnight, the GPS will never mark that you left. People always say it with a pinched smile, trying to make the warning sound like a charm. It is true. The ribbon will keep drawing a line for who you were. It will pass neat blue through the dark and carry on to morning as if that is what you did. Your car might even appear at a gas station camera at 3:10. A reflection in glass with a face the color of a television left on in an empty room. People will hold candles and say your name into air that does not owe you anything. They will call what happened to you a mystery, because that is easier than calling it ordinary. And if you keep going, if you let the last mile make up its mind about you, you will learn what everyone in San Angelo has always known and has taught their children without telling them. The road does not take you. It teaches you how to leave without telling anyone, and by the time they look up and notice, dawn has already made the world polite again. If you are reading this, it is only because you have not yet started your car. If the clock says 12:17, it will keep saying it until you stop looking. When you do, and the fence begins its long, patient line toward an ending you have already chosen, do not forget what the man in the blue truck told me. Do not answer when something in the back seat asks you to. If you do, you will know your own voice too well to blame the dark.